Black boy asked to give up VIP seat for white passenger, one call to his CEO. Dad changed it all. It's just good manners to respect your elders, young man. Now give up that seat. The words sliced through the cabin air like shards of glass sharp enough to make nearby passengers flinch as if physically struck. Thomas Anderson towered in the aisle of Atlantic Sky Airways Flight 342, his silver-haired authority casting a shadow over Seat 2A, where Jamal Wilson sat quietly, boarding pass clutched like a shield in his steady hands. The first-class cabin crystallized into a vacuum of sound as if truth had sucked all the oxygen from the air. Some seats cost money, others cost dignity. For Jamal Wilson, first-class Seat 2A would cost neither, but it would change the airline industry forever. The Atlanta International Airport churned around them, announcements blaring overhead like trumpets of chaos. Passengers rushing between terminals with the frantic energy of salmon fighting upstream roller bags clattering across polished floors like impatient heartbeats. But inside the aircraft, time froze in that singular moment of confrontation. Jamal hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. He simply existed in a space someone had decided wasn't meant for him. Behind Thomas Anderson stood his wife, Helen Pearls, gleaming at her throat like polished armor designer handbag clutched white-knuckled as if prepared for battle. And beside them both, watching with thinly veiled disapproval, stood Vivian Bennett, lead flight attendant, crisp uniform without a single crease. Perfect posture that announced authority and eyes that had already rendered judgment before Jamal had spoken a single word. Jamal Wilson wasn't like most teenagers traveling alone. At 17, his quiet confidence wasn't teenage bravado, but something earned, forged in the crucible of achievements most adults never attained. Behind thoughtful brown eyes that now gazed steadily at the man demanding his seat, lay a certified genius, perfect 4.0 GPA from Atlanta's most competitive prep school coding skills that had earned him 3 patents already, and now a coveted spot at Stanford University's prestigious summer engineering program. The program specifically selected 5 exceptional young minds in technological innovation, a field where black students like Jamal remained significantly underrepresented. His father, Isaiah Wilson, had insisted on purchasing him a first-class ticket for this important journey. "You've earned it with your hard work," Isaiah had said while booking the ticket, his fingers tapping on his 2025 MacBook Pro with deliberate precision. "Excellence deserves recognition, son. Never shrink yourself to fit spaces built with someone else in mind." What Jamal never mentioned to anyone at school was that his father, Isaiah Wilson, was the founder and CEO of Horizon Innovations, a rapidly expanding tech company whose revolutionary security software was transforming the industry. By his father's design, Jamal traveled under his mother's maiden name, Brooks, to maintain his privacy and ensure he made his own way without the shadow of his father's success. "You should stand on your own achievements," his father always said during their Sunday chess matches, where he taught strategy that extended far beyond the board. "Not on my name." The Wilson legacy isn't about wealth, it's about changing the game for those who come after us. Vivian Bennett had worked for Atlantic Sky for 23 years. At 53, she'd seen everything the skies could offer, or so she believed. Her perfectly styled blonde hair hadn't moved in 2 decades, much like her perspectives on who belonged where. She prided herself on knowing her cabin, on maintaining order, on ensuring everyone was in their proper place. First class had a certain standard, after all. She wore her senior status like a crown, her posture and tone silently announcing to passengers, "I decide who belongs here." Officer Gregory Thomas stood behind her, now security badge gleaming under the cabin lights like a warning hand resting casually near his taser, a gesture not of protection but intimidation. At 42, he'd spent 15 years in airline security developing what he called passenger profiling instincts, but what amounted to a collection of assumptions about who belonged where. His broad shoulders and stern expression were designed to intimidate, and they usually worked. He believed himself fair but efficient, never acknowledging the patterns in who he questioned and who he let pass unchallenged. The Andersons were regular first-class flyers, Thomas, with his Rolex watch that he checked repeatedly, as if time itself should bend to his schedule. Helen, with her manicured nails and practiced indignation that had been honed through decades of getting exactly what she wanted. 50 years married, they moved through the world expecting accommodation, particularly from this young person who clearly, to their eyes, didn't belong in their world. Watching from across the aisle sat Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney returning from a conference on equal justice. Her observant eyes, sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses, missed nothing as the scene unfolded. She'd seen this script play out before in restaurants, hotels, and, yes, airplanes. The subtle and not-so-subtle ways spaces were defended against those deemed not to belong. Her hand hovered over her iPhone 16, ready to document what she recognized as injustice in progress. "May I see your boarding pass?" Vivian's voice carried a practiced efficiency as she approached Jamal, the sweetness in her tone artificial as aspartame. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she extended her hand, palm up, expectant, the gesture of someone used to being obeyed without question. Jamal handed it over without comment. He'd been through this routine before, the assumption that he must be in the wrong place, the tax paid in patience by those whose presence requires justification. Vivian examined his boarding pass with unusual scrutiny, turning it over as if searching for evidence of forgery, holding it up to the light as if authentic tickets came with hidden watermarks. "There must be some confusion," she finally said, her tone implying the confusion was certainly not hers. The boarding pass, a simple rectangle of paper, suddenly transformed into something contested, its legitimacy challenged simply because of the hands that held it. "No, ma'am. Seat 2A. Jamal's reply was even respectful, but firm. The words few, but the boundary they established immovable. Vivian's mouth formed a thin line, lips pressed together as if physically restraining less professional words. "One moment, please." As she walked away with his boarding pass still in hand, his permission to exist in that space now physically removed from him, Jamal noticed the Andersons hovering in the aisle, watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Mr. Anderson whispered something to his wife, who nodded emphatically. Pearl earrings swaying with the motion like pendulums counting down to confrontation. The cabin continued to fill around them. A businessman in 1B glanced up from his laptop, witnessing the scene with growing discomfort, his fingers pausing mid-email. A young couple settled into row 3, their eyes darting occasionally toward the unfolding drama like spectators at a slow-motion accident. "Doctor." Rodriguez adjusted her glasses, her legal mind already cataloging details, recognizing patterns she'd documented throughout her career. Vivian returned several minutes later, reluctantly handing back Jamal's boarding pass, as if returning something stolen rather than borrowed. "It seems your ticket is in order," she said, sounding disappointed as if she'd been denied the satisfaction of being right. "However, we have a situation. The Andersons here." She gestured to the elderly couple with theatrical deference, "need to sit together, and Mr. Anderson has a first-class ticket. Mrs. Anderson was supposed to be upgraded as well, but there seems to have been a mistake with the system." Jamal looked up at the couple, then at the increasingly crowded aisle as more passengers boarded, their curious glances accumulating like weights on his shoulders. The boarding pass between his fingers, now verified legitimate, felt both like vindication and target. "I'd be happy to help." He began, his voice measured and calm as still water. "But I'm afraid I need to remain in first class. I have work to prepare for my internship during the flight." Vivian's professional veneer cracked like thin ice, revealing the cold current beneath. "Young man, this lovely couple has been married for 50 years. Surely you can understand why they need to sit together. There's a perfectly good seat in economy that would accommodate you." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear as a slap. You don't belong here anyway. The real passengers need your seat. The space you occupy is borrowed, not earned." "I understand their situation," Jamal replied, maintaining his composure while his heart drummed against his ribs. "But my father specifically purchased this ticket so I could prepare for my internship during the flight." Mr. Anderson stepped forward, his expensive cologne invading Jamal's space like an advance army. "Son, I'm sure your father would want you to do the right thing here. It's just good manners to respect your elders. Some lessons can't be taught in those fancy schools." Several other first-class passengers were now watching the interaction with undisguised interest, the entertainment of conflict momentarily more compelling than their pre-flight routines. Jamal felt the familiar discomfort of being the center of unwanted attention, of having his right to occupy space questioned. He'd felt it in upscale restaurants, when hosts asked if he was lost in department stores, when security shadowed him between aisles in academic competitions, when rivals suggested his presence was due to quotas rather than qualification, that subtle message that his presence required justification, while others were presumed to belong. "Sir, I understand." Jamal said, his voice steady, despite the tightness in his chest that made each word a deliberate act of control, "but this ticket was purchased specifically for this seat. It's not personal, I simply need the space for my work." Vivian's smile vanished completely now, like a mask dropped to reveal her true expression. "Let me be clear. We have an elderly couple who needs to sit together in first class. We have a simple solution that requires just a small sacrifice on your part. I find it difficult to believe that someone your age would be so unaccommodating." More passengers had stopped to watch, now the aisle becoming congested with bodies and judgments. Jamal could hear whispers rippling through the cabin like poisoned water. "Why doesn't he just move? Kids, these days, have no respect. Who does he think he is?" The boarding pass, in his hand printed with his name, his seat assignment, his right to be there, suddenly felt like the only solid thing in a world turning to quicksand beneath him. The captain announced over the intercom that they were experiencing a slight delay and would be on the tarmac for an additional 20 minutes before takeoff. Vivian seized this update like a weapon, using it to escalate the pressure. "We're already delayed," she said, her voice sharpening to a blade's edge. "The longer you refuse to cooperate, the longer everyone will have to wait. Do you want to be responsible for delaying an entire flight?" Officer Thomas appeared beside Vivian like a summoned enforcer, his presence expanding to fill the narrow aisle. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking directly at Jamal rather than Vivian, his question clearly assigning blame before hearing a word. "This young man is refusing to give up his seat to accommodate the Andersons." Vivian explained, her tone suggesting she was dealing with a bomb threat rather than a seating dispute. "Mrs. Anderson needs to sit with her husband in first class." Officer Thomas's expression hardened, jaw-setting like concrete. "Young man, we need to resolve this quickly. The captain wants all passengers seated. Now." Jamal felt his heart rate increasing with each beat, though he kept his expression neutral, a skill learned through years of being the only black student in advanced placement courses, of being followed in stores, of having to prove his existence was legitimate in spaces where his presence was questioned. This was rapidly becoming a scene exactly what his father had taught him to avoid. But he also remembered his father's other lessons about standing his ground when he was in the right. "I understand the situation." Jamal said, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil. "But I have paid for this specific seat, and I need the space and quiet of first class for my work." Officer Thomas and Vivian exchanged looks, a silent communication between allies. Then Thomas leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Jamal's, and lowered his voice to a dangerous whisper. "Listen, we have procedures for handling passengers who disrupt the boarding process. I'd hate for this to escalate further. Sometimes people get removed from flights. Sometimes they end up on no-fly lists. Do you understand what I'm saying? The threat wasn't veiled anymore. It was a knife against Jamal's future." He felt a chill run down his spine at the implication. How quickly refusing to give up a seat could transform into disruptive passenger a label with consequences that could follow him long after this flight. From across the aisle, Dr. Rodriguez shifted forward slightly, her attention fully captured by the escalating situation. The businessman in 1B had stopped pretending to work on his laptop and was watching openly, now his brow furrowed in concern. Mrs. Anderson spoke up, her voice pitched to carry through the cabin like an announcement. In my day, young people knew their place. They didn't inconvenience their elders. They showed respect. The pressure was building from all sides, Vivian's disapproval, Officer Thomas's implied threat, the Andersons' entitlement, and the weight of judgmental stares from throughout the cabin. Jamal's palms felt damp against the armrests. His heart hammered in his chest like something trying to escape. But outwardly he remained composed, a still center in the storm around him. A Hispanic flight attendant named Camila Ortiz paused nearby, watching the interaction with concern etched across her features. She took a step forward as if to intervene, but Vivian shot her a look that stopped her advance, the hierarchy between them clearly established. Camila said quietly, "His ticket is valid." "We can't. I'm handling this." Vivian cut her off sharply, the words like a door slammed in Camila's face. The tension in the cabin was palpable now, thick enough to touch. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes in the universal gesture of not wanting to get involved, others watching with morbid fascination. A man in the third row had begun recording on his phone, sensing something significant unfolding. Officer Thomas's hand drifted closer to his taser. A movement so subtle it might have been unconscious, but the message it sent was clear compliance or consequences. For exactly 6 seconds, Jamal considered yielding, not because he was wrong, but because sometimes being right wasn't enough protection in a world that hadn't caught up to its ideals. 6 seconds of weighing his dignity against his safety. 6 seconds of calculation. Then, decision made, Jamal reached for his phone and did something he rarely did. He called his father for help. As the phone rang, Vivian's smile returned cold and triumphant, clearly believing Jamal was about to capitulate. The Andersons stood watching Mrs. Anderson clutching her husband's arm with an expression of righteous indignation on her face. Little did any of them know that the person Jamal was calling would change the entire dynamics of this confrontation in ways none of them could imagine. The sleek black phone in Jamal's hand connected after 3 rings. Before he could explain the situation to his father, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I've been informed that we're having some seating issues. We won't be cleared for takeoff until all passengers are properly seated. Thank you for your patience." The announcement sent a ripple of annoyed murmurs through the cabin. Several passengers glared in Jamal's direction, clearly identifying him as the source of the delay. "Dad." Jamal said quietly into the phone, keeping his voice low to avoid creating more of a scene. "I've got a situation on the flight." On the other end of the line, Isaiah Wilson sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of Horizon Innovations headquarters. The Atlanta skyline stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows as he reviewed documents for a crucial merger negotiation that would take place in less than an hour. "What's happening, son?" Isaiah asked immediately, setting aside the papers when he heard the tension in his son's voice. 20 years of building a business empire had taught him to recognize when seconds mattered. As Jamal began explaining the situation, Vivian's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. She moved closer, hovering over him in what could only be described as an intimidation tactic. "Sir, all electronic devices need to be turned off during our delay," she said loudly enough for Isaiah to hear over the phone, her voice carrying a false authority. "That's not accurate," Jamal replied calmly, meeting her gaze directly. "The announcement specifically stated we could use devices until takeoff preparation." Officer Thomas returned with another crew member, a burlier man whose name tag identified him as Security Officer Brent Taylor. "Is this the passenger?" Brent asked, looking at Jamal with immediate suspicion, as if the question had already been decided. Jamal maintained his composure, though internally his heart hammered against his ribs like something caged and desperate. This escalation was all too familiar. The transition from inconvenience to threat happened so quickly for young black men. One moment disagreeing, the next moment dangerous. "Dad," he continued into the phone, "they're suggesting I should be removed from the flight if I don't give up my seat." Isaiah's voice remained calm, but took on an edge that Jamal recognized, the same tone he used when dealing with difficult business opponents, the voice of someone who could alter fortunes with a phone call. "Put me on speaker," Isaiah instructed. Jamal hesitated. "Are you sure? Yes." "Now." Jamal pressed the speaker button as Officer Thomas moved closer, hand now resting on his taser, in a posture that wasn't quite a threat but contained its promise. "Young man, you need to comply with crew instructions," Thomas said, leaning forward to loom over Jamal. "If you continue to disrupt this flight." "This is Isaiah Wilson," came the crystal-clear voice from the phone, cutting through the cabin air like a scalpel. "To whom am I speaking?" The authoritative tone caused Thomas to pause momentarily, the name registering somewhere in his consciousness, but not yet connecting. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Vivian interjected with practiced condescension. "Your son needs to follow crew instructions. My son has a valid first-class ticket and has broken no rules," Isaiah stated firmly, each word precisely placed. "And you've just made a significant mistake in how you're handling this situation." Vivian's expression faltered slightly, confidence wavering like a candle in wind. "Sir, we have procedures." "Yes, I'm familiar with airline procedures," Isaiah cut in. "I'm also familiar with discrimination law and aviation regulations regarding passenger rights. Now, who is your supervising officer on this flight? And I suggest you answer quickly, as I'm currently connecting to your corporate headquarters on another line." The cabin temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as these words landed. As this exchange unfolded, Dr. Rodriguez had begun recording the interaction on her phone. Others followed suit, sensing something significant was happening. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Anderson interjected, his indignation rising. "We just need seats together. My wife has anxiety." Isaiah continued, his voice carrying clearly over the speaker. "Officer Thomas, since you've identified yourself as security, I assume you're aware that removing a passenger who has a valid ticket and has broken no rules would constitute an actionable offense with significant legal and financial consequences for both you personally and your employer." Officer Thomas's posture stiffened, authority suddenly uncertain ground. "Sir, I'm following protocols." "Then you should know that those protocols require actual rule violations, not convenience for other passengers," Isaiah countered. "My son is a minor traveling alone. The airline accepted responsibility for his safe passage when you accepted payment for his ticket." Jamal watched as other passengers began whispering again, but the tone had changed, ripples of a different current. Some were clearly impressed by his father's knowledgeable response. The businessman in 1B caught Jamal's eye and gave a subtle nod of support. The confrontation triggered memories for Jamal. At 12, security had followed him through an electronics store as he browsed programming books, their hands hovering near their weapons, as if a child with an interest in coding presented a threat. At 15, his advanced coding project had been flagged for suspicious performance, the teacher unable to believe a black student could produce such sophisticated work without plagiarism. Just last semester at Westridge Academy, he'd faced similar treatment when he was accused of cheating after scoring perfectly on an advanced mathematics exam. The white teacher couldn't believe he'd achieved the score legitimately until his father came to the school with Jamal's previous test records and work samples. "Always keep your dignity," his father had told him after that incident, words that had become a compass. "But never let them push you down when you're in the right. The Wilson name isn't just wealth, it's the responsibility to make spaces better for those who come after you." Vivian's face had reddened considerably, a flush of realization creeping up her neck. "Sir, we're simply trying to accommodate an elderly couple." "At the expense of my son's legitimate seat assignment." Isaiah replied, each word landing like a chess piece moved with decisive purpose. I purchased that specific seat for a reason, and the reason wasn't so you could arbitrarily reassign it based on who you think looks more deserving. That last phrase hung in the air, naming what had been unspoken. Officer Thomas stepped forward again, desperation creeping into his posture. If this continues to cause a disruption... The businessman across the aisle suddenly spoke up, his voice carrying the confidence of someone used to being heard. "Excuse me, but I've been watching this whole interaction, and the only disruption is coming from your staff. This young man has been completely polite and reasonable. I'd testify to that effect if needed." Vivian turned to the businessman with a suddenly bright smile, the transformation jarring as a mask slipped into place. "Sir, we appreciate your concern. Actually, we might be able to offer you an upgrade to our premium cabin on your next flight for your patients today." The stark difference in treatment wasn't lost on anyone watching. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, the double standard laid bare. Dr. Rodriguez's camera continued recording, capturing every word, the evidence accumulating pixel by pixel. Camila had been observing from a distance, her conscience visibly wrestling with her job security. She approached cautiously, courage gathering with each step. "Vivian, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, quietly, professional but determined. As they stepped aside, Jamal heard Camila whisper with quiet urgency. "His ticket is completely valid. We can't remove him without cause. It could be a serious issue for the airline." Vivian shot back, voice lowered, but intensity increased. "That ticket has to be wrong. Look at him. How does someone like that afford first class?" Though she had attempted to speak quietly, her words carried in the now hushed cabin. Several passengers looked away in embarrassment, while others continued recording the damning sentence captured for posterity. Meanwhile, on the phone, Isaiah was taking action. As the CEO of a major technology company on the verge of a historic merger, he had connections that extended through corporate America like an invisible web. While maintaining the call with Jamal, he had his assistant connect him to the airline's corporate offices. "This is Isaiah Wilson of Horizon Innovations," he said to someone on another line, his voice still audible on Jamal's speaker. "I need to speak with someone about an incident occurring on Flight 342 from Atlanta to New York involving my son. And yes, that Horizon Innovations." The name Horizon Innovations caused a visible reaction among some of the first-class passengers, recognition dawning like sunrise. The company had been making headlines for months due to its revolutionary security software, and pending public offering expected to value the company at billions. The Wall Street Journal had featured Isaiah on its cover just last week. Back in the cabin, Officer Thomas had moved closer to Jamal's seat, desperation making his movements less controlled. "Fake ticket or not, if you're causing a scene, I have authority to remove you," he said in a low voice, a final gambit. Jamal, still holding the phone with his father on the line, looked directly at Officer Thomas. Fear present, but not prevailing. "My ticket is legitimate, and I haven't broken any rules. What's happening right now is being recorded by multiple passengers, and my father is on the line with your corporate office. I'm not moving from a seat I paid for." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Officer Thomas's face, the realization that he stood at a crossroads and had already taken several steps down the wrong path. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, breaking through the standoff. "Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." For exactly 6 seconds, the line went silent. Jamal's phone displayed call dropped as Brent moved closer, hand now resting on his taser. The worst 6 seconds of Jamal's life alone again surrounded. Then the phone reconnected. "Jamal, I'm still here." Isaiah's voice returned steady and certain. "Don't worry. The situation is being handled." Vivian returned visibly flustered, her composure cracking like porcelain under pressure. "This isn't over," she muttered to Jamal before addressing the Andersons. "I'm so sorry about this situation. Let me find you the best possible solution." As the confrontation temporarily de-escalated, Jamal took a deep breath, the first full breath that had felt possible in minutes. He put the phone back to his ear. "Dad, I think they're backing down for now." "I'm still here, son," Isaiah replied, "and I'm handling this at a higher level. Don't worry. Remember what I've always told you. Dignity isn't just something you claim Jamal completed the familiar wisdom, it's something you help secure for others." "Exactly," Isaiah affirmed. "What's happening today isn't just about your seat. It's about making sure they can't do this to the next person who doesn't have someone to call." What neither Jamal nor the flight crew realized was that Isaiah Wilson was not just making a complaint. He was about to dramatically change the power dynamics of the entire situation, not through threats, but through the strategic application of influence that would transform not just this flight, but an industry. The atmosphere on the plane crackled with tension like the air before a thunderstorm, that suspended moment when pressure builds but hasn't yet broken. Jamal remained in his seat, boarding pass now returned and placed deliberately on his lap like a deed to contested property. His phone still connected to his father as Vivian reluctantly guided the Andersons to separate seats, Mr. Anderson in first class and Mrs. Anderson in the front row of economy. The elderly woman's complaints were loud and pointed, with frequent glances back at Jamal, each look an accusation. "In my day, young people respected their elders," she announced to no one in particular, voice pitched to Carrie. "Some people just don't know their place anymore." The words hung in the cabin air, their true meaning transparent as glass. Dr. Rodriguez made eye contact with Jamal, giving him a subtle nod of support solidarity between strangers who recognized a shared battle. The businessman in 1B, whose name badge identified him as Michael Harrington, VP at Goldman Sachs, leaned slightly toward Jamal. "That was handled impressively," he said quietly, respect evident in his tone. "Most people would have given in to that kind of pressure. I've watched passengers surrender seats they paid for just to avoid conflict." "Thank you for speaking up," Jamal replied, the simple acknowledgement carrying genuine gratitude. "I've seen this before," Michael said, his voice lowering. "I'm just sorry it happened to you. They never would have questioned my right to sit here." He gestured to his own white skin, the unspoken advantage named without ceremony. From the row behind, a young woman who had been silently observing everything spoke up. "I've had my seat questioned 3 times this year," she confided. "It gets exhausting proving you belong somewhere." Jamal nodded, recognizing the shared experience. At just 17, he had already accumulated a lifetime of such moments. Each one had shaped him, taught him to navigate spaces where his presence was questioned, his legitimacy a constant burden of proof. At 12, security had followed him through an electronics store as he browsed programming books, their hands hovering near their weapons as if a child with an interest in coding presented a threat. He had noticed even then how their eyes tracked him while white children wandered freely, how suspicion attached to his curiosity like an unwanted shadow. At 15, his advanced coding project had been flagged for suspicious performance. The teacher unable to believe a black student could produce such sophisticated work without plagiarism. This level of algorithm optimization is unusual. The teacher had said the accusation veiled but clear. It took 3 separate demonstrations of his coding process with his father present before the suspicion lifted, and just last semester he'd been stopped at the entrance to a competitive math symposium, the coordinator insisting he must be at the wrong event until a white professor vouched for his credentials. "This is the advanced theoretical mathematics competition," the coordinator had said slowly, as if Jamal's comprehension rather than his belonging was in question. Each incident had built his resilience, but also his exhaustion. His father had taught him to handle these situations with dignity, never raising his voice, never showing his anger, always maintaining his composure. Your excellence is your greatest defense, Isaiah would say, but sometimes even excellence needs reinforcement. On the phone, Isaiah's voice interrupted Jamal's thoughts. Son, I've reached Richard Phillips, CEO of Atlantic Sky. He's aware of the situation now. Jamal kept his voice low. What does that mean? It means things are about to change, not just for this flight, but for how they operate. Some lessons aren't taught, they're demonstrated. In his downtown office, Isaiah Wilson had activated connections most people didn't realize he possessed. Richard Phillips was not just any airline CEO, he was a potential business partner. Atlantic Sky Airways was one of 3 major airlines considering Horizon Innovations' revolutionary security software, a deal potentially worth hundreds of millions. Moreover, Isaiah's company was evaluating a substantial investment in their parent company as part of a diversification strategy. Isaiah. This is unexpected, Phillips had replied when the call connected. Surprise evident in his voice. I thought we were meeting next week to discuss the partnership. We were, Isaiah confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned to speak from the center of his power. But right now, my 17-year-old son is being harassed by your staff on Flight 342 from Atlanta to New York. They're threatening to remove him from a first-class seat I purchased because they'd prefer to give it to an elderly white couple. There was a moment of silence on the line, the vacuum that forms when realization hits. That's concerning. Phillips finally said, his tone shifting from corporate pleasantry to damage control. I'll look into it immediately. I suggest you do more than look into it, Isaiah replied, measured but unmistakably firm. Because right now, multiple passengers are recording your staff suggesting my son doesn't belong in first class, implying his ticket must be fraudulent and threatening him with removal despite breaking no rules. All captured on video that's currently being uploaded to platforms where it will be viewed by millions before your investigation even begins. While this conversation unfolded back on the plane, passengers had begun posting clips of the confrontation to social media. The hashtag #FirstClass, while Black was already gaining traction, reaching thousands of views within minutes. The digital counter-narrative spreading at the speed of outrage. Jamal, unaware of the corporate machinations his father had set in motion, watched as Officer Thomas received a call on his radio. The officer's expression changed from smug confidence to confusion as he listened to the voice on the other end. But Sir Thomas protested into his radio, moving toward the front of the cabin for privacy, his back a rigid line of resistance. The situation requires intervention. Whatever response came through the radio caused Thomas's shoulders to stiffen. He glanced back at Jamal with an unreadable expression, part confusion, part dawning comprehension that he had miscalculated badly. Meanwhile, Camilla casually passed by Jamal's seat and leaned down as if adjusting something. Whatever's happening, it's big, she whispered, her words barely disturbing the air between them. The captain just got a call from Director Reynolds. I've never seen that happen before. Jamal nodded slightly, maintaining his composed exterior while his mind raced. His father had always taught him about leveraging advantage in difficult situations, but he'd never witnessed it happening on this scale, power shifting like tectonic plates, invisible but reshaping everything. A few rows ahead, Vivian was summoned to the galley area for what appeared to be an intense conversation with the head flight attendant. Her gestures became increasingly defensive, hands cutting through the air in sharp denial. When she emerged, her face was flushed with a combination of anger and embarrassment, the complexion of someone watching certainty dissolve. Across the aisle, Michael caught Jamal's attention again. I'm an investment banker. He introduced himself quietly, recognition dawning in his eyes. Your father must be someone significant in the business world. Before Jamal could respond, a ripple of activity at the front of the cabin drew everyone's attention. The captain himself had emerged from the cockpit, an unusual occurrence before takeoff, like seeing the wizard step from behind the curtain. He was followed by a woman in a crisp Atlantic Sky Airways executive uniform who hadn't been on the plane before. The captain made his way directly to Jamal's seat, navigating the narrow aisle with purpose. The contrast to the previous confrontation couldn't have been more stark. Authority now bending toward respect rather than intimidation. "Mr. Brooks," the captain said, using Jamal's travel name with a respectful nod. "I'm Captain Williams. I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today. We've had a bit of a misunderstanding with our crew." The executive beside him stepped forward. "I'm Vanessa Torres, Elite Passenger Services Director. I'd like to speak with you privately if possible." Jamal, still processing this dramatic turn of events, glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom were watching with undisguised interest. The Andersons in particular appeared completely baffled by the sudden deference being shown to the young man they had tried to displace. "I'd prefer to stay in my seat if that's all right," Jamal replied calmly. Power shifting, but his center holding steady. "We've already been delayed, and I wouldn't want to inconvenience the other passengers further." The pointed reminder of the delay caused entirely by the crew's treatment of him wasn't lost on Captain Williams, who nodded uncomfortably. The acknowledgement unspoken but clear. "Of course. Ms. Torres will ensure you have everything you need for a comfortable flight. And if you'd like to visit the cockpit before we land in New York, consider it an open invitation." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Jamal noticed something else. Vivian and Officer Thomas were nowhere to be seen. They had been replaced by different crew members who smiled at Jamal with almost excessive warmth as they prepared the cabin for takeoff. "What just happened?" asked an elderly black woman seated behind Jamal, leaning forward with undisguised curiosity, her voice carrying decades of witnessing the world's inequities. Jamal smiled slightly. "I think my father made a phone call." The woman chuckled appreciatively, the sound knowing and satisfied. "Must have been some phone call. In my 82 years, I've never seen the system correct itself that quickly without someone important pulling strings." Ms. Torres remained beside Jamal's seat. "Mr. Brooks, I want to assure you that Atlantic Sky Airways takes these situations very seriously. The crew members involved have been reassigned pending a full investigation of this incident." Reassigned, Jamal questioned the euphemism transparent. "You mean they're not on this flight anymore?" "That's correct," Ms. Torres confirmed, choosing her words with newfound caution. "We've brought in replacement crew members to ensure everyone has a positive experience for the remainder of the journey." In the economy section, Jamal could see Mrs. Anderson gesticulating angrily to a flight attendant pointing repeatedly toward first class. Whatever response she received didn't appear to satisfy her, but for once her complaints weren't creating any action from the crew. Privilege suddenly encountering its limits, a novel experience for someone accustomed to accommodation. As the replacement flight attendants began the safety demonstration, Jamal returned to his phone call. "Dad, what did you do?" Isaiah's voice came through calm but tinged with satisfaction. "I simply made sure they understood who they were dealing with. Son, the CEO of their parent company, and I have some business to discuss next week. I simply moved up part of the conversation. They removed the crew members who were giving me trouble," Jamal informed him, still processing the rapid turn of events. "Good," Isaiah replied. "But that's just the beginning. What happened to you today happens to people who don't have the connections I have. This isn't just about solving your problem. It's about making sure they address the fundamental issues that created it. The Wilson legacy isn't wealth, it's change." As the plane finally began taxiing toward the runway, Jamal received a text message from his father. "Don't move. Help is coming." The message seemed odd given how much had already changed, but Jamal had learned to trust his father's strategies. Whatever was happening behind the scenes was clearly far from over. The boarding pass that had been contested now sat securely in his pocket, no longer just permission to occupy space, but evidence of a larger battle being fought on multiple fronts. The massive engines of the Boeing 787 roared to life as Flight 342 finally lifted off from Atlanta's runway nearly 45 minutes behind schedule. Jamal watched the sprawling city shrink beneath him, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape, like elongated fingers reaching for something just beyond grasp. The first-class cabin had settled into an uncomfortable quiet, the kind that follows after witnessing something extraordinary, but not wanting to acknowledge it directly. Vanessa Torres, the elite. Passenger Services Director, had arranged herself in the jump seat near Jamal during takeoff, her presence both attentive and nervous. As soon as the seatbelt sign dinged off, she approached him again with a tablet in hand. Her manner transformed completely from the confrontation earlier. "Mr. Brooks, we've taken the liberty of adjusting your return flight to our premium first-class service, complimentary of course," she said, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "And the airline would like to offer you elite status for the remainder of the year." Jamal nodded politely but said nothing, remembering his father's text. The situation felt surreal. Just 30 minutes ago, he had been threatened with removal from the flight. Now he was being offered upgrades in status, the corporate version of a hasty apology. Also, Torres' continued slight desperation creeping into her professional demeanor. Captain Williams still extends his invitation to visit the cockpit. "It's quite a fascinating experience." "Thank you," Jamal replied. "I might take him up on that later." As Torres retreated to speak with other crew members, Jamal reflected on previous experiences with discrimination incidents that hadn't ended with airline executives scrambling to make amends. Just 3 months earlier, he had been shopping at Ravington's, an upscale department store in Buckhead, looking for a gift for his mother's birthday. Despite being well-dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, he had been followed by security from department to department, their presence constant as a shadow at noon. When he finally selected an elegant silk scarf, the cashier had asked to see additional identification with his credit card. Something he noticed wasn't requested from the white woman who checked out before him. On another occasion, he and his friends had made reservations at an exclusive restaurant to celebrate a science competition victory. Despite the reservation, they were seated near the kitchen while watching other parties who arrived after them being led to premium window tables. The server had repeatedly asked if they were sure about their orders, subtly suggesting less expensive options, as if their budget, rather than their preference, determined their choices. These memories washed over Jamal as he observed the now solicitous behavior of the flight crew. The injustice wasn't that he had been mistreated. It was that the mistreatment only stopped because of who his father was, that dignity had to be enforced, rather than assumed that respect had to be commanded, rather than freely given. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his phone. Opening his social media app, he was startled to see that one of the videos taken by other passengers had already garnered over 50,000 views. The hashtag #FirstClassWhileBlack was trending nationwide, with people sharing similar experiences of discrimination on airlines, a digital chorus of Me Too that revealed not an isolated incident, but a pattern as wide as the sky the plane traversed. In the economy section, Jamal could see Mrs. Anderson still complaining to anyone who would listen occasionally, shooting glares toward the first-class cabin. Her husband, seated in first class, but now several rows behind Jamal, kept his eyes firmly fixed on his magazine, apparently wanting no further part in the controversy that had exposed something in him he preferred to keep hidden. A young Hispanic woman in her late 20s settled into the seat beside Jamal, which had remained vacant during boarding. She extended her hand with a warm smile that reached her eyes. "I'm Elena Vasquez. Another upgrade they've suddenly found space for," she said with knowing irony. "I was in premium economy, but Ms. Torres insisted I'd be more comfortable up here. I have a feeling I have you to thank for that." Jamal shook her hand. "Jamal Brooks, and I think they're just trying to change the optics of the situation." Elena laughed softly. "Oh, absolutely. Nothing says we're not discriminating, like suddenly finding room for another person of color in first class. Corporate America's version of I have black friends." She lowered her voice. "I saw what happened during boarding. You handled yourself impressively well." "Thanks," Jamal replied. "I've had practice. Haven't we all?" Elena agreed with a knowing look that spoke of shared experience across different contexts. "I'm a marketing executive with Vanguard Financial. Corporate America isn't much different from this flight. You're fine until you try to take a seat someone doesn't think you deserve." As they chatted, Jamal learned that Elena had navigated similar waters throughout her career, being mistaken for administrative staff despite her executive position having her ideas attributed to white colleagues in meetings, being asked to tone down her natural hair for important client meetings with statements like, "We need you to look more professional," that carried unmistakable subtext. "You learn to pick your battles," she advised, stirring the premium cocktail a flight attendant had rushed to bring her. "Save your energy for the fights that matter. Not every hill is worth dying on, but some are worth occupying no matter the cost." Their conversation was interrupted when the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams. I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure. Atlantic Sky Airways prides itself on providing excellent service to all our valued passengers. As a token of our appreciation for your patience, we'll be offering complimentary premium beverages to everyone on today's flight." The announcement was met with appreciative murmurs from around the cabin, though Jamal noticed several passengers glancing his way. The narrative had clearly shifted. What had been framed as his disruption was now officially acknowledged as a failing on the airline's part, responsibility relocated from the individual to the institution. 30 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant appeared with an elaborate meal service just for Jamal, something no other passenger in first class received. The obvious special treatment made him uncomfortable, but he accepted it graciously, understanding it represented panic rather than genuine contrition. "Your father must be someone important," Elena observed quietly, watching the parade of attention Jamal was receiving. Jamal hesitated before responding. "He runs a technology company, Horizon Innovations." Elena's eyes widened with recognition. "Your father is Isaiah Wilson. The Isaiah Wilson, the one who's about to take his company public in what analysts are calling the most anticipated IPO since Facebook." Jamal nodded, slightly embarrassed by her reaction. "Well, that explains the 5-alarm fire you've apparently set off at this airline," Elena said with a low whistle. "Horizon is the company developing that revolutionary security software. Everyone's talking about the one that's supposed to transform airport screening." She paused, connecting the dots. "Wait, is Atlantic Sky one of the airlines looking to partner with Horizon for their security systems?" Before Jamal could respond, a new notification appeared on his phone. A text from his father. "Just announced major acquisition of CyberGuard Inc. press release going out now. Atlantic Sky CEO Richard Phillips has agreed to a full review of their customer service policies and bias training programs. This isn't just about today, son." As if on cue, Ms. Torres appeared beside Jamal's seat, again looking even more attentive than before. Her demeanor transformed from concerned to deferential. "Mr. Brooks, Captain Williams was hoping you might be available to visit the cockpit now before we get into the busier airspace approaching New York." Jamal glanced at Elena, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Go see what this is really about," she suggested quietly. "Sometimes the most valuable information comes when people think they're in control again." As Jamal followed Torres toward the front of the plane, he caught snippets of conversations from other passengers, many discussing the breaking business news on their devices, information spreading through the cabin like ripples across still water. Horizon just acquired CyberGuard. Stock is soaring in after-hours trading. Biggest security software merger this year, valued at over $3.2 billion. The business implications of his father's company were far beyond Jamal's immediate concerns, but he understood enough to know that the timing was deliberate. A power move designed to coincide exactly with his flight chess pieces moving on multiple boards simultaneously. When he reached the cockpit door, Torres knocked lightly before using her key to open it. Inside, Captain Williams and his co-pilot turned to greet Jamal with expressions that could only be described as deferential, the look of men who had received very clear instructions about the importance of this particular passenger. Mr. Brooks, Captain Williams said, extending his hand. "Thank you for joining us. I wanted to personally assure you that what happened during boarding does not reflect the values of Atlantic Sky Airways or my crew." The co-pilot nodded in agreement. "We've received direct communication from corporate headquarters about your situation. Apparently, there's been quite a stir." Jamal took in the sophisticated array of instruments and displays that surrounded the pilots, a technological symphony of buttons, screens, and indicators. "It's an impressive cockpit," he said deliberately, not addressing the subtext of their comments, refusing to make their discomfort easier. "It is indeed," Captain Williams agreed, launching into an explanation of the aircraft systems, clearly relieved to change the subject to something within his expertise. As the captain showed him various features, the co-pilot leaned closer to Jamal. "Between us," he said, quietly, voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the aircraft, "I've never seen anything like the response your situation generated. We got a call directly from Regional Director Reynolds, who said he was on with corporate headquarters. Whatever your father said to them, it went straight to the top." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "My father believes in accountability." After the cockpit tour concluded, Torres escorted Jamal back to his seat. As he settled in, Elena gave him a questioning look. "They're scared," Jamal confirmed quietly. "Really scared." "Good," Elena replied with satisfaction. "Fear is sometimes the only language corporations understand. Your father just gave them an expensive lesson in customer service." As the flight continued toward New York, Jamal received another text from his father. This one included a link to a business news article that had just been published. The headline read, "Horizon Innovations acquires CyberGuard in landmark deal. CEO Wilson emphasizes corporate responsibility in new ventures." The article quoted his father directly. "Companies that partner with Horizon are expected to uphold the highest standards of ethical conduct and equitable treatment for all. This isn't just about technology. It's about creating structures that serve everyone fairly." In today's business environment, ethics and economics are inseparable. The message couldn't have been clearer, and Jamal understood now why his father had told him not to move. This wasn't just about resolving an unpleasant incident. It was about leveraging that incident to force broader change, using privilege not just for protection, but for transformation. As the plane began its initial descent toward New York, Jamal wondered what would await him when they landed. Whatever his father had set in motion was clearly far from over. The boarding pass in his pocket, once contested, now vindicated, had become something more evidence of a moment when indignity met influence and catalyzed change. In the galley area at the front of the plane, a conversation was taking place that Jamal couldn't hear. Two replacement crew members were speaking in hushed tones, words flowing with the urgency of breaking news. "I heard they took Vivian and Thomas off at the gate," one whispered, leaning close to her colleague. "They're suspended pending investigation." "This is bigger than that," the other replied, eyes darting to ensure no passengers were within earshot. "Corporate is in full panic mode. Apparently there's video of Vivian saying, 'How does someone like that afford first class?' It's already getting hundreds of thousands of views online. There's more." The first attendant added, voice tight with the thrill of insider knowledge. Some passenger who was boarding behind the Andersons recorded Mrs. Anderson saying, "People should know their place," and Mr. Anderson asking why they let those people in first class at all. Jesus, the second attendant, whispered the word, half prayer, half curse. And this kid's father turns out to be Isaiah Wilson of Horizon Innovations. The same, and apparently Atlantic Sky was trying to close a huge deal with them. Wilson has put all negotiations on hold. He's demanding a complete overhaul of their passenger treatment policies before he'll even consider resuming talks. For a seating dispute. It wasn't a seating dispute. It was discrimination captured on video that's being shared faster than they can contain it. And Wilson knows exactly what leverage he has. Back in his seat, unaware of this conversation, Jamal watched the Manhattan skyline come into view through his window, the iconic architecture emerging through clouds, a testament to human ambition and design. The flight that had begun with discrimination was about to land in territory his father had already prepared. The true consequences were just beginning to unfold, rippling outward from a single contested seat to corporate boardrooms where power shifted in seismic ways. Cabin crew prepare for landing, the computerized voice announced as Flight 342 began its final approach into JFK International Airport. The New York skyline glittered against the darkening eastern sky, a forest of lights emerging as dusk settled over the city. For Jamal, the view represented new possibilities, both the upcoming Stanford internship and the unexpected turn his journey had taken. The transformation in his treatment since his father's intervention had been nothing short of remarkable. Where hours earlier he had been threatened with removal from the plane, now the entire crew treated him with a deference that bordered on obsequious fear, dressed as respect compliance, masquerading as contrition. As if to underscore this reversal, a flight attendant appeared beside his seat, leaning down with a conspiratorial smile. "Mr. Brooks, we've arranged for priority deplaning for you. As soon as we reach the gate, Ms. Torres will escort you out before other passengers." Jamal shook his head slightly. "That won't be necessary. I'm happy to deplane with everyone else." The flight attendant appeared momentarily confused by his refusal of special treatment, as if the script she'd been given didn't include this possibility. "Are you certain? It's no trouble at all?" "I'm sure," Jamal confirmed. "But thank you." From across the aisle, Michael Harrington, who had spoken up earlier, gave Jamal an approving nod. "Smart move," he commented quietly. "Refusing special treatment keeps the moral high ground. Special doors and separate paths have a complicated history in this country." Elena leaned closer to Jamal. "Not to mention, it avoids antagonizing the other passengers any further," she added. "The Andersons are still glaring daggers your way." Indeed, Mr. Anderson had spent much of the flight sending resentful looks toward Jamal, while his wife continued her vocal complaints in economy. Their sense of entitlement had not diminished, even as the power dynamics had completely reversed a lifetime of privilege, making its loss feel like oppression. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump and the thrust reversers engaged with their characteristic roar, Jamal's phone lit up with another message from his father. "Atlantic Sky CEO Richard Phillips has agreed to meet us at the terminal. This conversation is moving to the next level. I've arranged transportation for you from the gate." Jamal showed the message to Elena, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "The CEO himself at the terminal," she whispered. "That never happens. Your father must have some serious leverage." I'm beginning to realize that Jamal admitted still processing the scope of his father's influence. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, passengers began the usual rush to retrieve luggage and exit the aircraft. Jamal remained seated, following his father's instruction to wait. Ms. Torres hovered nearby, her attention still fixed on him despite his refusal of priority deplaning. "Mr. Brooks," she said as the cabin gradually emptied. "I'll escort you to the meeting point when you're ready." Jamal nodded, gathering his backpack and following her toward the exit. As he passed through first class, he noticed Mr. Anderson had already departed, apparently eager to avoid any further interaction conflict abandoned when advantage disappeared. Captain Williams stood at the aircraft door, personally thanking each first-class passenger for flying with Atlantic Sky. When Jamal approached, the captain's demeanor shifted from professional courtesy to something approaching genuine remorse. "Mr. Brooks," he said, extending his hand, "I want to personally apologize again for your experience today. What happened was unacceptable." Jamal shook his hand, recognizing the sincerity in the man's eyes. "Thank you, Captain Williams." As he stepped into the jet bridge, Jamal was surprised to see Vivian and Officer Thomas standing off to one side, flanked by airline officials in corporate attire. Their expressions were a mixture of apprehension and resentment as they watched him exit the plane, fallen authority figures witnessing the consequences of their actions. Ms. Torres guided Jamal past them without acknowledgement, leading him through a side door that bypassed the regular terminal route. They emerged into a private reception area where several people waited, including his father. Isaiah Wilson cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his commanding presence drawing the eye despite the room's other occupants. At 45, with closely cropped salt and pepper hair and penetrating dark eyes, he embodied the confidence of someone who had built something significant from nothing, dignity, not requested but assumed as birthright. Beside him stood an older white man with silver hair and an expensive suit, presumably Richard Phillips, the airline's CEO, along with several other executives whose nervous expressions suggested they understood the gravity of the situation. Jamal Isaiah said warmly, embracing his son before turning to the airline representatives, his demeanor shifting from paternal to corporate precision. "Gentlemen, this is my son, the young man your employees threatened to remove from his rightfully purchased seat based on nothing more than his appearance." Richard Phillips stepped forward, extending his hand to Jamal. "Mr. Brooks, or should I say, Mr. Wilson, I'm Richard Phillips, CEO of Atlantic Sky Airways. I want to express my deepest apologies for what occurred on your flight today." The use of both surnames wasn't lost on Jamal. Phillips clearly wanted to acknowledge that he understood exactly who Jamal was. Now identity suddenly a privilege rather than a burden. "Mr. Brooks is fine," Jamal replied evenly, shaking the offered hand. "My father and I prefer to keep our connection private most of the time." "Of course," Phillips agreed quickly. "I understand completely. Privacy is important, especially for someone your age." Isaiah placed a supportive hand on Jamal's shoulder. "My son has faced these kinds of situations before, Richard. The difference today is that he had the means to fight back through my connections. Most people who experience this treatment have no recourse. They're simply removed from seats they paid for, subjected to humiliation they don't deserve, and left without remedy." Phillips nodded uncomfortably, perspiration gathering at his temples despite the room's perfect climate control. "We take these matters very seriously, Isaiah. The employees involved have been removed from service pending a full investigation." "Removed from service?" Isaiah repeated contemplatively, the words examined like specimens under glass. "And if my son were just an ordinary teenager without connections to your potential business partner, would they still have been removed from service, or would they have removed him instead?" The question hung in the air, its answer obvious to everyone present. The silence that followed was complete 5 seconds of unspoken truth. "Dad," Jamal said quietly, breaking the silence, "I appreciate what you've done, but I don't want special treatment because of who you are. That's its own kind of problem." Isaiah studied his son with pride. "You're right, and that's precisely why this needs to be about more than just you. This is about fixing a broken system, not just navigating it successfully." Turning back to Phillips, Isaiah continued, "Richard, our companies are on the verge of a significant partnership, one that could revolutionize airline security and passenger experience. But I need to know that I'm partnering with an organization that values all its customers equally." Phillips straightened his posture. "Absolutely, Isaiah. Which is why I've already initiated a comprehensive review of our customer service policies." "Reviews are good," Isaiah acknowledged. "Action is better. My son shouldn't have needed my intervention to be treated with basic dignity. No passenger should." As this conversation unfolded, the door opened and Mrs. Anderson burst in, followed by her husband, who appeared to be trying to restrain her, his hand on her arm more plea than control. "There he is," she exclaimed, pointing at Jamal with the same finger that had accused him on the plane. That's the young man who refused to give up his seat. We've been flying with this airline for 30 years and I've never been treated so poorly." The security personnel moved to intercept her, but Phillips held up a hand to stop them. His expression had hardened noticeably, the calculation of a CEO weighing damage control options. "Mrs. Anderson, I presume," he asked coolly. "Yes," she confirmed, momentarily taken aback by being addressed by the well-dressed executive. "And I demand to know why we weren't accommodated properly. My husband is a Platinum member." Phillips glanced at an aide who nodded confirmation. "Mrs. Anderson, I understand you were upset about seating arrangements, but from what I've been told, you expected this young man to give up a seat he had legitimately purchased so that you could sit in first class despite having an economy ticket." "Well, yes," but she began, certainty faltering. "That's not how our seating policy works," Phillips interrupted firmly. "All passengers deserve the seats they've purchased. No passenger is entitled to displace another regardless of their age, race, or status." The direct rebuke from the airline's CEO left Mrs. Anderson momentarily speechless, privilege encountering its limits in an unfamiliar way. Mr. Anderson took the opportunity to step forward. "We apologize for the confusion," he said, clearly embarrassed. "My wife was anxious about flying, and we hoped to sit together. Then perhaps next time you should purchase 2 first-class tickets," Phillips suggested coldly. "Or accept the complimentary seats in economy that I understand were offered to both of you." The Andersons retreated, escorted firmly but politely from the room by security personnel. As the door closed behind them, Phillips turned back to Isaiah and Jamal. "I hope that demonstrates our commitment to addressing this issue properly," he said. Isaiah appeared unmoved. "It's a start, but public reprimands after the fact aren't the same as preventing the problem in the first place." As the conversation continued, additional people entered the room, including several members of Isaiah's executive team who had flown in specifically for this impromptu meeting. Jamal recognized his father's strategy, transforming a personal slight into an opportunity for structural change by leveraging the full weight of his company's influence. The news of Horizon's acquisition of CyberGuard had significantly strengthened Isaiah's position. Atlantic Sky Airways needed his company's security software more than his company needed their business. A fact everyone in the room clearly understood. In that moment of silence, power stood revealed not in raised voices or threats, but in the simple reality of who needed whom more. As the adults launched into detailed discussions about policy changes and accountability measures, Jamal found himself momentarily forgotten. He used the opportunity to check his phone, finding dozens of notifications. The videos of his confrontation had gone viral, with major news outlets picking up the story and social media buzzing with commentary. One notification in particular caught his attention. A message from Elena, with whom he had exchanged contacts before deplaning. "Just saw the news about your dad's company. Now I understand why the airline panicked. Hope you're using this moment to push for real change. Not everyone has a CEO dad to call when this happens." Her words resonated with what Jamal had been thinking throughout this ordeal. The privilege of having his father's influence had protected him today. But what about all the others who faced similar discrimination without such resources? The boarding pass that had almost been taken from him was now safely in his pocket, but so many others had theirs confiscated without recourse. As if sensing his thoughts, Isaiah drew Jamal back into the conversation. "My son will be flying with your airline frequently during his internship at Stanford," he told Phillips. "I want your personal assurance that what happened today will lead to meaningful changes in how your staff treats all passengers, not just those with connections." Phillips nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Isaiah. By the time Jamal flies with us again, we'll have implemented new training protocols for all customer-facing staff." "And the employees involved today?" Isaiah pressed. Phillips hesitated. "Initially, I planned to terminate them immediately, but—" "No," Jamal interrupted, surprising everyone. All eyes turned to him. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that forms when unexpected wisdom emerges. "That's not what I want," Jamal continued. "Firing them doesn't solve the underlying problem. It just makes them bitter and reinforces their beliefs. What if instead they became part of the solution?" Isaiah studied his son with interest. "What are you suggesting?" "Jamal education." Jamal replied simply, "Make them part of developing and implementing the new training. Let them learn why their actions were wrong and help prevent others from making the same mistakes. You can't punish bias away, you have to transform it." A thoughtful silence followed his suggestion, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. "That's actually quite insightful," Phillips finally said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Rehabilitation rather than punishment." Isaiah smiled proudly. "My son has always seen solutions where others see only problems. It's why he'll make an exceptional engineer someday." As the meeting continued, plans took shape not just for addressing the immediate incident, but for creating lasting change within the airline's culture. What had begun as a humiliating confrontation was transforming into something much more significant, a catalyst for institutional reform. By the time Jamal and his father left the airport that evening, the world had already begun to react to both the viral videos of discrimination and the news of Horizon's strategic acquisition. The narrative was shifting from a simple case of airline misbehavior to a powerful example of how corporate influence could be leveraged for positive social change. "You know," Isaiah said as their car navigated through Manhattan's evening traffic headlights, illuminating raindrops on the windows like scattered stars, "you handled yourself exceptionally well today, son." Jamal looked out in the city lights. "I just did what you've always taught me. Stand my ground when I'm right, but find solutions that lift everyone up." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just fighting back. It's changing the structure that allowed it to happen in the first place. As they approached their hotel, both father and son knew that what had transpired that day would have repercussions far beyond one flight or one airline. The reversal of fortune that Jamal had experienced was just the beginning of a much larger transformation, a contested seat becoming the catalyst for an entire industry's reckoning. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury hotel suite, illuminating the Manhattan skyline beyond. Jamal sat at the glass desk, scrolling through his phone with a mixture of awe and discomfort. Overnight, the story had exploded across traditional and social media platforms. First class. While Black was trending nationally with over 2 million posts and counting, the boarding pass that had sparked it all lay on the desk beside him, no longer just a travel document, but a symbol of contested space and reclaimed dignity. "CNN wants an interview," Jamal called to his father, who was speaking quietly on his phone in the living area. "So do MSNBC, Fox News, and The Today Show." Isaiah ended his call and joined his son, glancing at the cascade of notifications on Jamal's phone. "That's to be expected. Your video has over 7 million views now." The original clips captured by fellow passengers had been compiled into longer versions that tracked the entire confrontation from Vivian's initial questioning of Jamal's ticket to the dramatic reversal after his father's intervention. News organizations were running the footage alongside commentary about racial profiling in commercial settings. "I don't want to do interviews," Jamal said firmly. "This isn't about me seeking attention." Isaiah nodded, respecting his son's decision. "You don't have to, but understand that your experience has resonated with millions of people who face similar treatment without the resources to fight back." As if to emphasize this point, Jamal's phone lit up with another notification, a direct message from someone he didn't know. "Thank you for standing your ground. Last month I was forced to give up my first-class seat for a white businessman despite having paid full price. I complained, but nobody listened. Watching you fight back gave me hope. It was just one of hundreds of similar messages flooding in from across the country. Stories of black travelers who had been questioned, relocated, or removed from flights without justification. Each message a drop in an ocean of shared experience. "It's not just about airlines either," Jamal observed, showing his father another message describing discrimination at a high-end restaurant. This has opened the floodgates for people sharing experiences across all kinds of businesses. The hotel phone rang, and Isaiah answered it briefly before turning back to Jamal. "That was Richard Phillips. Atlantic Sky is calling a press conference for this afternoon to address what happened. They want us there." Jamal frowned. "So they can show me off as proof that they're not racist." That would be their preferred narrative. It would. Isaiah agreed with a knowing smile. "But we don't have to play along with their script. Sometimes you achieve more by refusing the role they've written for you." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. When Isaiah opened it, Elena Vasquez stood in the hallway dressed professionally in a tailored blue suit, her presence a welcome surprise. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said. "Your assistant said I could stop by." "Not at all," Isaiah welcomed her. "Jamal mentioned your conversation on the flight. I appreciate you supporting him through that situation." Elena entered the suite, taking in the luxurious surroundings with an appreciative glance. "I came because I saw the press conference announcement. As someone who works in corporate marketing, I recognized a damage control operation when I see one." She set her leather portfolio on the coffee table and took a seat. "They're going to try to frame this as an isolated incident that's been resolved. Standard corporate playbook: apologize, announce some vague review of policies, maybe make a donation to the NAACP and hope everything blows over while nothing actually changes." Jamal joined them in the sitting area. "So what should we do instead?" "Elevate the conversation," Elena suggested, leaning forward with intensity. "This isn't about one flight or one airline. It's about the everyday reality of navigating spaces as a black person in America." She opened her portfolio, revealing printouts of dozens of similar incidents reported across major airlines over the past 5 years. Flight attendants questioning black passengers' first-class tickets, security being called without cause, and passengers being removed for non-compliance when they objected to discriminatory treatment. "I stayed up half the night gathering these," Elena explained, passion evident in every word. "This is a structural problem in the industry, not a few bad apple employees at Atlantic Sky. The problem isn't a broken branch, it's roots that run deep." Isaiah studied the documents with growing resolve. "Jamal, this larger context changes my thinking about the press conference. If you're willing, your presence there could help ensure they don't minimize what happened." Jamal considered this perspective. While he hadn't sought the spotlight, perhaps he had a responsibility to use it now that it had found him. "What would I need to do?" "Just be present," Elena advised. "Your father and I can handle the corporate maneuvering. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply showing up and refusing to let them control the narrative." As they discussed strategy for the afternoon's press conference, Jamal's phone continued to ping with notifications. One message caught his attention from Michael Harrington, the businessman who had defended him on the flight. "Just saw the press conference announcement. Be careful. They'll try to use your presence to claim the issue is resolved. If you need business perspective before attending, I'm available. This case has significant implications." The warning aligned with Elena's assessment, reinforcing Jamal's growing understanding of how corporations typically handled these situations. The pattern was familiar public apology token gestures and quick burial of the underlying issues. "There's something else to consider," Isaiah said thoughtfully. "Our technology partnership with Atlantic Sky. The acquisition announcement yesterday puts us in a unique position of leverage." Elena nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. You're not just a passenger they mistreated. You're the son of a major business partner. That changes the power dynamic entirely." Jamal looked between them, grappling with the complexity of the situation. "But isn't it wrong to use that privilege when others don't have it? Most people who face discrimination can't call a CEO." That's precisely the point, Isaiah replied, fixing his son with a steady gaze. We use our position to create change that benefits everyone, not just ourselves. The privilege would be wasted if we didn't leverage it for broader impact. Power isn't just something you possess, it's something you direct. As the conversation continued, Jamal reflected on his mother's teachings before she passed away 5 years earlier. She had always emphasized that privilege came with responsibility, that those with advantages had an obligation to create pathways for others. My mother would say we should push for structural change, Jamal said finally. Not just apologies to me, but real policy changes that protect everyone. Isaiah's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. She would be incredibly proud of you right now, son. For a moment, the room fell completely silent, that sacred pause when absent loved ones feel momentarily present. The moment was interrupted by another call, this time from Atlantic Sky's PR team, asking to pre-brief them on the press conference format. Isaiah put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. We've prepared a statement expressing our deepest apologies to Mr. Brooks, the PR representative explained using Jamal's travel name. The CEO will announce a comprehensive review of our customer service policies and a new diversity training initiative. We'd like Mr. Brooks to stand with our executives as a show of unity and reconciliation. Elena and Isaiah exchanged knowing glances, exactly as predicted, the corporate script unfolding like clockwork. That sounds incomplete, Isaiah responded smoothly. Before confirming our attendance, we'd like to see specific commitments to measurable changes, not just reviews and training announcements. There was an uncomfortable pause on the line. Mr. Wilson, we understand your concerns, but we're still investigating the incident. Concrete policy changes take time to develop properly. Indeed they do. Isaiah agreed. Which is why we've taken the liberty of preparing some suggestions based on similar incidents across the industry. My assistant will send them over shortly. We believe these could form the foundation of meaningful reform within Atlantic Sky. After ending the call, Isaiah turned to Jamal. The choice is still yours, son. You don't have to attend if you're uncomfortable with the publicity. Jamal thought about all the messages he'd received, people who had faced similar discrimination without recourse, without a platform, without the protection of a powerful parent. His discomfort with attention seemed insignificant compared to the opportunity to create real change. I'll go, he decided, picking up the boarding pass from the desk, the symbol of his contested space now becoming a tool for broader transformation, but not as a prop for their narrative. We go on our terms. As they prepared for the press conference, Jamal received another message that crystallized the importance of what was happening. It was from a young black boy, no more than 12, based on his profile picture. My mom says I can be anything I want when I grow up, but sometimes people make me feel like I don't belong in nice places. Seeing you stand up for yourself makes me believe her. Jamal showed the message to his father without comment. No further explanation was needed. This was why they couldn't simply accept apologies and move on. The stakes were too high, the impact too far-reaching. The press conference would be just one step in a longer journey, but it was an important one. What had begun as a personal humiliation was transforming into something much more significant, a catalyst for addressing patterns of discrimination that affected countless others who never made headlines. As they left the hotel for Atlantic Sky's corporate headquarters, Jamal understood that the true test wouldn't be what happened at today's press conference, but what changes would still be in place months and years later when the cameras had moved on to other stories. The sleek lobby of Atlantic Sky Airways' Manhattan headquarters bustled with unusual activity as security personnel established perimeters and communication staff directed media representatives to their designated areas. Glass and steel dominated the architecture, with the company's distinctive winged logo prominently displayed behind the reception desk, polished pristine, perfect. By the time Jamal, Isaiah, and Elena arrived, A significant media presence had already assembled, far more than would typically attend a standard corporate announcement. Camera crews adjusted equipment, reporters checked microphones. The machinery of modern media preparing to broadcast what was supposed to be a controlled narrative. "They've moved it to their largest conference room," Elena observed as they were escorted through security. "That suggests they're expecting significant attendance. This story has legs." Their guide, a nervous young woman from the PR department, led them to a private preparation room adjacent to the main conference space. Inside, Richard Phillips paced while assistants made last-minute adjustments to his appearance, straightening his tie, dabbing powder on his forehead, polishing the corporate mask to a high shine. "Isaiah Jamal." He greeted them with forced cordiality. "Thank you for coming. We've incorporated some of your suggestions into our announcement today." "Some?" Isaiah questioned, his tone pleasant but firm as steel. Phillips gestured for his assistants to leave before responding, waiting until the door closed behind them. The board felt that certain proposals required more thorough evaluation before we could commit to them publicly. "I see," Isaiah replied. "And which proposals were those specifically?" As the two executives launched into a detailed discussion of policy points, Jamal stepped to the side with Elena. Through the partially open door, he could see media continuing to arrive, not just travel reporters, but major network news teams. CNN, MSNBC, even international outlets. "They're treating this like a major story," he observed quietly. "Because it is," Elena confirmed. "Discrimination in commercial settings has been normalized for so long that it rarely makes headlines unless something extraordinary happens, like the CEO's son being mistreated, followed by a viral video and a major business deal, the perfect storm." A commotion near the lobby entrance drew their attention. Two familiar figures were being escorted through security. Vivian Bennett and Officer Thomas, the flight attendant and security officer from the incident. "They brought them here?" Jamal asked in surprise. "Probably part of their strategy?" Elena assessed, eyes narrowing. "Show that they're facing the issue head-on rather than hiding the employees involved." But something about Vivian and Officer Thomas's demeanor seemed off. Rather than appearing contrite, they moved with the confidence of people who expected vindication. Chins lifted, shoulders back, the posture of those who believe themselves wronged rather than wrong. Jamal watched as they were led to a different waiting area, noting the supportive pats on the back they received from certain airline staff members. "Something doesn't feel right," he murmured. Before Elena could respond, another arrival captured their attention. Michael Harrington, the businessman from the flight, strode through the lobby with purposeful steps. When he spotted Jamal watching from the doorway, he gave a subtle nod before being directed to the main conference room. "Did you invite him?" Elena asked. "No," Jamal replied, "but I'm glad he's here." A representative appeared to inform them that the press conference would begin in 5 minutes. Phillips excused himself to make final preparations, leaving Isaiah, Jamal, and Elena to follow shortly after. "Remember," Isaiah advised his son, his hand resting briefly on Jamal's shoulder, "you don't need to speak unless you want to. Your presence alone sends a powerful message." When they entered the main conference room, Jamal was momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of cameras and reporters. A podium bearing the Atlantic Sky logo stood at the center of a small stage, with chairs arranged to either side. Phillips gestured for them to take seats to his right, a calculated positioning meant to suggest unity with the company's response to visually bind them to the corporate narrative. Instead, Isaiah guided Jamal and Elena to seats slightly removed from the executive team, establishing visual independence. The subtle power move wasn't lost on the reporters, several of whom immediately began taking notes, the choreography of the room becoming part of the story. Phillips approached the podium as cameras flashed and microphones were adjusted. His opening statement followed the expected corporate template expressions of regret, affirmations of company values, and promises of review and improvement. Atlantic Sky Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, he declared, with practiced sincerity. The incident involving Mr. Brooks was a serious failure to uphold that policy, and we take full responsibility. As Phillips continued, Jamal noticed Vivian and Officer Thomas being seated on the opposite side of the stage, their expressions unreadable. Something about the choreography of their placement felt deliberate, almost theatrical actors positioned for a specific scene. To demonstrate our commitment to addressing this incident transparently, Phillips continued, "We've invited the employees involved to participate in this conversation. Ms. Bennett and Mr. Thomas have agreed to make statements regarding their actions." Jamal exchanged a questioning glance with his father. This hadn't been mentioned during their earlier discussions. Isaiah's slight frown suggested he was equally surprised by this development. Vivian approached the podium first, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. The performance of nervousness perfectly calibrated. "I want to apologize for how the situation was handled," she began, her voice steady despite her apparent nervousness. "However, I need to clarify that my concerns about Mr. Brooks's ticket were based on standard security protocols, not his race." Murmurs rippled through the assembled reporters like wind through grass, as Vivian continued. "When passengers appear to be in the wrong cabin, particularly younger travelers were trained to verify their documentation. This helps prevent boarding pass mix-ups and potential security issues." The narrative she presented skillfully reframed her actions as professional diligence rather than discrimination, a security measure that would have been applied to any young passenger regardless of race. The revision of history happening in real time. Officer Thomas followed with a similar statement emphasizing Atlantic Sky's strict security requirements and his obligation to respond to crew concerns. At no point was Mr. Brooks's race a factor in my assessment of the situation. He insisted the denial absolute. Jamal watched as some reporters nodded along with these explanations, the initial outrage being subtly transformed into a misunderstanding about security protocols. The airline was executing a classic deflection strategy, acknowledging a poor customer experience while denying any racial component, washing the incident clean of its most damning element. Phillips returned to the podium building on the revised narrative. "While we acknowledge that our employees could have handled the situation with greater sensitivity, we want to be clear that Atlantic Sky does not tolerate racial discrimination in any form." The implication was unmistakable. This wasn't discrimination. It was just poor customer service. To address these concerns, Phillips continued, "We're announcing a comprehensive customer service enhancement program and a review of our verification procedures to ensure all passengers are treated with respect." As Phillips outlined vague commitments to enhance training and review policies, Jamal felt a growing frustration. The airline was effectively minimizing what had happened, recasting a clear instance of racial profiling as a procedural misstep, erasing the reality he had experienced. Beside him, Isaiah remained impassive, though Jamal recognized the slight tightening of his jaw, a tell that his father was calculating his next move like a chess player seeing 3 moves ahead. When Phillips opened the floor for questions, the first came from a CNN reporter. "Mr. Phillips, the videos clearly show Ms. Bennett suggesting there must be a mistake with the ticket specifically because it was held by a young black passenger. How does that align with your characterization of this as a security procedure rather than profiling?" Phillips began a careful response about context and training, but before he could finish, Michael Harrington stood from his seat near the front. "If I may," the businessman interjected, his voice carrying authority that commanded attention. "I was on that flight and witnessed the entire interaction. I'd like to add some crucial context that's being omitted here." Though clearly annoyed by the interruption, Phillips had little choice but to acknowledge Harrington, whose presence as a witness gave his perspective unique weight. The flight attendant specifically stated that she found it difficult to believe someone your age would be so unaccommodating about giving up a first-class seat, Harrington recounted with precision. Yet, when I, a middle-aged white man, defended Mr. Brooks, I was immediately offered an upgrade on a future flight, rather than being questioned about my own seat assignment. Harrington's precise recollection silenced the room, truth dropping like a stone in still water. Additionally, he continued, I heard Ms. Bennett question how someone like that could afford first class. I'm curious what aspect of Mr. Brooks beyond his race would prompt such a comment. The pointed question hung in the air as reporters furiously took notes. Phillips attempted to regain control of the narrative, but the damage had been done. Harrington had effectively challenged the sanitized version of events the airline was presenting. At that moment, Jamal made a decision. Leaning toward his father, he whispered, I want to speak. Isaiah studied his son's face before nodding. Are you sure? Yes, Jamal confirmed, determination solidifying. They're trying to rewrite what happened. I need to set the record straight. When Jamal raised his hand to indicate he wished to address the room, Phillips could hardly refuse him, the victim at the center of the incident everyone had gathered to discuss. As Jamal approached the podium, cameras focused on him. Despite his youth, he carried himself with remarkable poise, adjusting the microphone with steady hands. For 5 seconds, he said nothing, simply stood, letting the room feel the weight of his presence. My name is Jamal Wilson Brooks. He began using both his father's surname and his mother's maiden name publicly for the first time. I'm 17 years old and was traveling to New York for a summer internship at Stanford University when this incident occurred. The room fell completely silent, crystallized into a vacuum of sound, as if truth had sucked all the oxygen from the air. I want to address a few points that have been mischaracterized today. First, my ticket was questioned immediately upon boarding before any security concerns could possibly have been assessed. Second, when the Andersons arrived, Ms. Bennett didn't ask if I would be willing to move. She informed me that I should move, suggesting it was the right thing for someone my age to do. Jamal paused, making eye contact with reporters before continuing, his voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Most importantly, this wasn't an isolated incident. Since this story broke, I've received hundreds of messages from Black travelers who've had nearly identical experiences, being asked to verify their tickets repeatedly, being pressured to give up seats they paid for, or being treated as suspicious for simply being in premium cabins. He gestured toward Vivian and Officer Thomas. I don't believe Ms. Bennett and Mr. Thomas are bad people. I believe they, like many others, have unconscious biases that affect how they perceive and treat people who look like me. That's why I don't want them fired. I want them and Atlantic Sky to acknowledge these biases and commit to addressing them honestly. The authenticity of Jamal's statement was undeniable, shifting the energy in the room dramatically. When he returned to his seat, Phillips appeared visibly uncomfortable, aware that his carefully constructed narrative had been effectively dismantled by the teenager's measured testimony. Before Phillips could respond, Isaiah rose and approached the podium. As Jamal's father and as CEO of Horizon Innovations, I want to be clear about our expectations moving forward, he stated, authority radiating from him like heat. We came here today expecting meaningful commitments to change, not a reformulation of the problem. He turned to face Phillips directly. Richard, our companies are still negotiating a significant partnership, one that would be beneficial for both organizations, but that partnership must be built on shared values, including a genuine commitment to addressing bias at all levels. The implicit threat was clear. The lucrative deal between their companies hung in the balance not as blackmail, but as alignment of values. To that end, Isaiah continued, I'm prepared to offer Horizon's resources to help develop truly effective anti-bias training programs based on measurable outcomes, not just good intentions. We're also willing to delay our formal partnership announcement by 30 days to give Atlantic Sky time to demonstrate concrete steps toward implementation. The business implications of this public proposal sent reporters into a frenzy of note-taking and photographers capturing the moment. Phillips, caught between corporate interests and public perception, had little choice but to appear receptive. "We welcome Horizon's expertise and look forward to developing this initiative together." He managed his forced smile, barely concealing his discomfort at having the terms dictated so publicly. As the press conference concluded, reporters swarmed around Jamal Isaiah and Elena, peppering them with questions that they skillfully deflected with promises of a more detailed statement in the coming days. Making their way through the crowd toward the exit, they found Michael Harrington waiting for them. That was quite a power move, the businessman commented to Isaiah with undisguised admiration. Leveraging a business deal for social change. "Business and social responsibility aren't separate concerns," Isaiah replied. "At least they shouldn't be. Commerce without conscience isn't sustainable." Harrington handed Jamal his card. "If you ever need business perspective on any of this, I'd be honored to help. What you did today wasn't just brave. It was strategically brilliant." As they departed the building, Jamal noticed a small group gathered outside, ordinary people holding hastily made signs supporting him and thanking him for speaking out. Some were in airline uniforms, suggesting that Atlantic Sky employees themselves were divided on the issue. Among them stood a young Hispanic flight attendant who approached cautiously. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly to Jamal. "Things like this happen more than anyone admits, but nobody ever hears about it. You've given a voice to so many of us who can't speak up." As their car pulled away from the curb, Jamal reflected on the unexpected turn his journey had taken. What had begun as a simple flight to an internship had somehow become the catalyst for a corporate reckoning on race and discrimination. The resolution was only beginning, but the path forward was clearer than it had been just 24 hours earlier. The boarding pass, still in his pocket, once contested, now vindicated, had become a symbol of something larger than his own journey. It represented spaces, reclaimed dignity, restored, and structures being rebuilt more equitably than before. 1 week after the viral confrontation and subsequent press conference, Jamal sat in the sunlit study of his father's Manhattan apartment reviewing the settlement offer that had arrived via courier that morning. The document, bound in an expensive leather portfolio bearing Atlantic Sky's embossed logo, detailed a substantial financial offer alongside extensive non-disclosure provisions. He traced his finger over the embossed logo, the same one that had adorned Vivian's uniform, that hung above the check-in counter that symbolized the institution that had questioned his right to occupy space. Now this institution was offering to pay for his silence. $500,000, Elena observed, looking over his shoulder. "That's their price for your silence," the corporate equivalent of hush money. In the days following the press conference, public opinion had continued to build against the airline. Additional videos of the incident had surfaced contradicting Vivian and Officer Thomas's sanitized accounts. Social media campaigns had emerged, calling for boycotts, and competitors had begun subtly positioning themselves as more inclusive alternatives in their advertising. The settlement offer was Atlantic Sky's attempt to make the problem disappear, a standard corporate strategy when public relations disasters threatened the bottom line. Put a price tag on dignity, pay it, and move on. Isaiah joined them, coffee cup in hand, steam rising like morning thoughts. "What are you thinking, son?" Jamal closed the portfolio deliberately, the sound of it shutting like a door being locked. "I'm thinking that this isn't just about me anymore." Over the past week, he had received thousands of messages from people sharing similar experiences, not just on airlines, but in restaurants, hotels, high-end stores, and countless other spaces where Black presence was still sometimes treated as inherently suspicious. Many reached out specifically because they knew they would never receive the corporate attention that Jamal's case had generated. "If I take this money and sign their confidentiality agreement, nothing really changes," Jamal reasoned, pushing the portfolio away like something distasteful. "They pay me off, issue some vague statement about resolving the matter, and everything goes back to normal until it happens to someone else. You can't put a price tag on dignity, and you certainly can't buy my silence." Isaiah nodded, having anticipated this response. "There are other approaches we could consider." Before they could discuss alternatives, the apartment's intercom buzzed. The security desk announced the arrival of Dr. Anthony Durham, a civil rights attorney who had contacted the family after the press conference offering his services pro bono. When the attorney entered the study minutes later, his expression suggested he already knew about the settlement offer. "They sent their standard package, I see," Durham commented, gesturing toward the portfolio. "Let me guess, significant financial compensation coupled with comprehensive non-disclosure requirements." "You've seen this before," Isaiah observed. Durham nodded grimly. "More times than I can count. It's the corporate playbook for handling discrimination cases when the evidence is too strong to deny pay for silence, make public statements about learning and growing, and continue business as usual." The attorney set his briefcase on the desk, retrieving several files, the weight of evidence, physical as well as metaphorical, who experienced similar treatment on Atlantic Sky flights within the past year alone. None received the corporate attention that Jamal did. He spread several complaints across the desk, documented instances of black passengers being questioned about first-class tickets, moved from premium seats despite valid bookings, or subjected to extra security scrutiny without cause. This is deeply ingrained in their operations, Durham concluded, not isolated incidents. The problem isn't a few bad apples, it's the entire orchard. Jamal studied the documents, recognizing patterns identical to his own experience. "So what alternatives do we have besides taking their money or filing a lawsuit?" Durham smiled appreciatively at the question. "I've been giving that considerable thought. Traditional litigation has its place, but it's slow, expensive, and often results in the same confidential settlements we're trying to avoid. What if we proposed something more innovative?" Over the next hour, they outlined a different approach, one that prioritized structural change over personal compensation. By the time they finished, a framework had emerged that could potentially transform how Atlantic Sky addressed racial bias throughout its organization. The following morning, Jamal, Isaiah, and Durham arrived at Atlantic Sky's headquarters for a meeting with Richard Phillips and the airline's legal team. The executives clearly expected a negotiation over settlement terms, perhaps a request for more money or modified confidentiality provisions. What they received instead was something entirely different. "We're declining your settlement offer," Jamal stated calmly as the meeting began, sliding the unopened portfolio back across the conference table. The portfolio slid smoothly across polished wood, coming to rest before Phillips like a rejected peace offering. Phillips leaned forward, confusion evident in his expression. "I assure you, Mr. Brooks, our offer is quite generous by any standard. If the amount is unsatisfactory, the amount is irrelevant." Jamal interrupted, his voice steady despite his youth. "I'm not interested in being paid for my silence." Durham placed a document folder on the table. "Instead, we're proposing an alternative resolution, one that addresses the structural issues, rather than simply compensating Jamal for his individual experience." As Phillips and his legal team reviewed the proposal, their expressions shifted from confusion to obvious concern. Rather than a counter-demand for money, they were looking at a comprehensive program for institutional change. One, the creation of an independent review board to evaluate customer complaints related to discrimination with representation from civil rights organizations and diverse community members. 2, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, designed and evaluated by experts in the field rather than generic corporate trainers. 3, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and resolutions published annually for public review. 4, a mentorship program specifically designed to increase diversity in leadership positions within the airline. 5, most significantly, the establishment of the Wilson Protocol, a standardized procedure for handling seating disputes that removed individual employee discretion and potential bias from the equation. "This is extensive," Phillips finally said, setting down the document. "It's necessary," Isaiah countered, "and considerably less expensive than the class action lawsuit that Dr. Durham is prepared to file on behalf of the 27 other passengers who have already contacted his office with similar complaints." The implied threat hung in the air, reinforced by Durham's measured nod of confirmation. "We're offering you a choice," Jamal explained. "You can fight a public, protracted legal battle that will cost millions in legal fees and incalculable damage to your brand, or you can become a leader in addressing an industry-wide problem." Phillips studied Jamal with new respect, recognizing that the teenager had effectively maneuvered the airline into a corner. The corporate executive glanced at his legal team, who seemed to be calculating the potential costs of each option. "What about the employees involved?" Phillips asked. "Ms. Bennett and Mr. Thomas." "That's actually where our proposal differs most significantly from standard procedures," Jamal replied. "Instead of terminating them, which would likely only reinforce their resentment, we suggest making them part of the solution." He outlined a rehabilitation-focused approach, one where Vivian and Officer Thomas would participate in developing the new training protocols, sharing their perspectives on how implicit biases had influenced their actions, and working directly with the independent review board to improve the airline's response to similar situations. "Punishment without education changes nothing," Jamal explained. "But giving them the opportunity to become part of the solution could transform not just their understanding, but the culture of your entire organization. Some people need to be fired. Others need to be transformed." Phillips sat back in his chair, clearly reassessing the young man across the table. What had initially appeared to be a standard discrimination complaint had evolved into something much more sophisticated. A comprehensive blueprint for institutional reform. "Your father has clearly taught you well about leverage in negotiations," Phillips observed with grudging admiration. "My father taught me about business," Jamal corrected. "My mother taught me about justice. This proposal honors both lessons." After a lengthy discussion of implementation details and timelines, Phillips reluctantly agreed to present the proposal to Atlantic Sky's board of directors with a decision promised within 72 hours. As they left the meeting, Durham clapped Jamal on the shoulder. "That was masterfully done. Most people would have taken the money. Most people don't have the privilege of being able to refuse it," Jamal acknowledged. "That's exactly why I couldn't accept it. This has to be about more than just me." The complete silence that followed his words was profound, the sacred pause when truth is recognized and honored. 3 days later, the answer came. Atlantic Sky's board had approved the proposal with minor modifications to implementation timelines. What had begun as a humiliating confrontation over a first-class seat was transforming into a model for how corporations could address structural discrimination when properly motivated to do so. The announcement generated a new wave of media attention, with business publications analyzing the potential industry-wide implications and civil rights organizations cautiously praising the airline's commitment to measurable change rather than merely symbolic gestures. For Jamal, however, the most meaningful responses came not from media outlets, but from individual messages, people inspired by his refusal to accept personal compensation in favor of structural reform. One message in particular captured the significance of his decision. It came from Camilla, the sympathetic flight attendant who had quietly supported him during the original confrontation. "What you've done will change things for all of us. Not just passengers, but crew members of color who've been afraid to speak up about what we see happening. You had every right to take their money and walk away. Thank you for choosing the harder path instead." As summer progressed and Jamal began his internship at Stanford, reports filtered back from Atlantic Sky employees about the implementation of the new policies. The Wilson Protocol was being developed with input from diverse stakeholders, and the first round of enhanced anti-bias training had begun with Vivian Bennett, surprisingly emerging as one of its most committed participants. "I never saw myself as biased," she had admitted in one of the early sessions, voice hesitant but determined. "I thought I was just doing my job. It's taken me time to recognize how my assumptions shaped my actions, and that's the hardest part, seeing what was invisible to me but painfully visible to others." What had started as a personal humiliation had catalyzed a transformation that would potentially benefit thousands of travelers who would never know Jamal's name, but would experience the effects of his transformative decision. The boarding pass that had been contested now hung framed in Jamal's Stanford dormitory, no longer just a travel document, but a symbol of spaces reclaimed and structures rebuilt. It reminded him daily of a simple but profound truth. Dignity isn't just something you claim for yourself, it's something you help secure for others. 6 months later, Jamal stood in the same Atlanta International Airport, this time preparing to board a flight back to New York for his second semester at Stanford. The early January chill had necessitated heavier clothing than his previous journey, but otherwise the scene appeared similar. Crowded terminals, hurried travelers, the constant hum of airport announcements. Yet much had changed since that fateful day in June. The Wilson Protocol had been fully implemented across Atlantic Sky Airways, establishing clear guidelines for handling seating disputes that removed subjective judgment from the process. The airline's anti-bias training program had been expanded to all staff members, not just those in customer-facing roles. Most significantly, Atlantic Sky had appointed its first black female chief flight attendant, a 20-year veteran named Diana Rivera, who had previously been passed over for promotion despite her exemplary record. The structural changes were becoming visible in the faces of leadership. Jamal approached the gate for his flight boarding pass in hand. As he joined the priority line, he noticed with mild surprise that Vivian Bennett was working the gate, checking boarding passes with professional efficiency. She recognized him immediately, her expression flickering with momentary discomfort, before settling into something more complex, a mixture of embarrassment and determination. The journey from antagonist to advocate written in the lines of her face. "Mr. Brooks," she acknowledged, scanning his boarding pass. "It's good to see you again." The simple greeting contained no trace of the condescension that had characterized their first interaction. Jamal nodded politely, noting the small pin on her uniform lapel that identified her as a cultural awareness ambassador, part of the new program she had helped develop. "How has the implementation been going?" Jamal asked as she returned his boarding pass. Vivian seemed surprised by the question, but answered thoughtfully. "It's been educational. Challenging sometimes, but necessary." She hesitated before adding, "I've learned a lot about perspectives I never considered before." "That's the point," Jamal replied, seeing what was previously invisible. As Jamal proceeded down the jet bridge, he reflected on the complex nature of change, how it rarely followed a straight line, and often began with uncomfortable self-examination. Vivian's transformation from antagonist to advocate hadn't been immediate or simple, but it appeared genuine. Aboard the aircraft, Jamal was greeted by a flight crew that reflected noticeably more diversity than his previous flight. The head flight attendant, a black woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Diana Rivera. Chief attendant welcomed passengers with warm professionalism. Settling into his first-class seat, Jamal observed the boarding process with interest. When an elderly couple entered, not the Andersons, but similar in appearance, they presented their boarding passes to Rivera, who directed them to their separate seats with courteous efficiency. There was no suggestion that another passenger should be displaced to accommodate their preference to sit together. The structural change was subtle, but significant fair treatment applied consistently rather than selectively. Policy replacing preference. As boarding continued, Jamal was surprised to see Elena Vasquez making her way down the aisle. She spotted him and broke into a delighted smile. "Jamal, what are the odds?" she exclaimed, taking the seat beside him. "I'm heading to New York for a conference. I didn't realize you were flying today." "Back to Stanford for spring semester," he explained. "How have you been?" Elena's smile widened. "Actually, I have news. Atlantic Sky recruited me last month. I'm their new Vice President of Diversity and Customer Experience. I start next week." "That's fantastic," Jamal replied sincerely. They couldn't have made a better choice. "It's a direct result of everything that happened with your case," Elena acknowledged. "They created the position specifically to ensure the new protocols are properly implemented. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create opportunity. Their conversation was briefly interrupted when Jamal noticed two familiar figures boarding the plane, the Andersons looking noticeably subdued compared to their previous encounter. Mrs. Anderson made eye contact with Jamal but quickly looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the recognition. The Andersons completed the sensitivity training program last month, Elena explained, following his gaze. It was a condition of maintaining their frequent flyer status after multiple complaints were filed against them. The revelation surprised Jamal. "I wouldn't have expected them to agree to that." "People can surprise you," Elena replied. "Sometimes negative experiences become opportunities for growth if they're willing to learn from them." Mrs. Anderson actually became quite engaged in the later sessions once she moved past her defensiveness. As the flight prepared for departure, Jamal received a text message from his father's Stanford Business School. "Just added your case study to their curriculum." The Wilson Protocol. Transforming corporate response to bias is now required reading for their corporate social responsibility course. Your mother would be incredibly proud. The news filled Jamal with quiet satisfaction. The incident that had begun with humiliation had evolved into an educational tool that would influence future business leaders, creating ripples of change far beyond one airline or one passenger's experience. Midway through the flight, Captain Williams, the same pilot who had captained Jamal's original journey, made his way from the cockpit to personally greet him. "Mr. Brooks," the captain said, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've accomplished these past months. The changes you initiated have made a real difference in how we operate." Jamal accepted the handshake. "I'm glad to hear that. Has the implementation been difficult?" "Change always is," Williams acknowledged candidly. "But necessary change is worth the effort. The Wilson Protocol has actually made our jobs easier in many ways. Clear guidelines mean fewer judgment calls in difficult situations." As Williams returned to the cockpit, Jamal noticed a young black woman in economy looking uncomfortable as a flight attendant questioned her about something. Without hesitation, Jamal pressed his call button. When a flight attendant responded, he quietly explained his concern that the passenger might be experiencing unfair scrutiny. The attendant nodded respectfully and went to investigate. Minutes later, Jamal saw the young woman being escorted to an empty first-class seat with an apologetic smile from the crew. When she passed his row, she gave Jamal a grateful nod of recognition, not for his intervention specifically, but for being someone who noticed and cared enough to speak up. The moment crystallized something important for Jamal. True change wasn't just about policy documents or training programs, though those were essential foundations. It was about creating a culture where people felt empowered to recognize and address potential injustice, even when it didn't affect them directly. As the plane began its descent into JFK, Jamal reflected on how different this journey was from his previous one. The same airline, the same route, even some of the same staff. Yet everything had changed because people had been willing to acknowledge problems and commit to addressing them. When the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, Elena turned to Jamal with a thoughtful expression. "You know what happened with you, and Atlantic Sky is being studied as a model for effective corporate response to discrimination. Several other airlines have already adopted versions of the Wilson Protocol." "That's good to hear," Jamal replied, genuinely pleased by the wider impact. "But there's something even more significant that's happened," Elena continued. "Your story has helped people understand that standing firm against discrimination isn't just about individual victories. It's about creating structural change that benefits everyone." As they made their way through the terminal, Jamal noticed people occasionally glancing his way with expressions of recognition. His story had resonated far beyond what he could have imagined when he simply refused to give up a seat he had rightfully purchased. Outside the airport, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Elena offered Jamal a parting thought. "The most powerful thing about what you did wasn't refusing to move from your seat. It was refusing to accept individual compensation in exchange for silence." Jamal nodded, understanding the distinction. Individual remedies don't fix broken structures. Exactly, Elena agreed. And that's the lesson people have taken from your experience. That sometimes standing firm isn't just about personal dignity. It's about creating pathways for others who don't have the same privileges or platform. As Jamal caught a taxi toward Stanford's campus, he thought about the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple flight 6 months earlier. What had started as a personal confrontation had evolved into something much more significant, a catalyst for change that would continue to influence how companies address discrimination long after the specific details of his experience faded from public memory. The taxi passed through Manhattan's busy streets, the city pulsing with energy and possibility. Jamal knew that the work of creating truly equitable spaces was far from complete, both in the travel industry and in society at large. But he had learned firsthand that persistence and strategic leverage could transform individual incidents into opportunities for structural improvement. In that knowledge lay a powerful lesson that each person who refused to accept discrimination, who stood firm in the face of injustice, contributed to a larger movement toward the world they wanted to create. Jamal's stand had been amplified by his father's influence, but its true power came from connecting to the experiences of countless others who had faced similar treatment without recourse. As the taxi approached Stanford's campus, Jamal's phone pinged with a final message from his father. "Your mother always said that privilege isn't just something you benefit from. It's something you leverage for those who don't have it. You've honored her memory by doing exactly that. I couldn't be prouder of the man you're becoming." In that moment, Jamal understood that new beginnings weren't just about moving forward. They were about carrying forward the lessons of the past to create better paths for the future. 2 years after the incident that changed the airline industry, Jamal Wilson sat in a conference room at Horizon Innovations headquarters. Now 19 and a sophomore at Stanford, he had matured into a poised young man whose experience had shaped his educational path. While still pursuing engineering, he had added a minor in ethical leadership inspired by the unexpected journey that began on that flight. The conference room table was surrounded by executives from 3 major airline civil rights leaders and corporate consultants. They had gathered for the first formal review of what was now widely known as the Wilson Protocol, implemented across not just Atlantic Sky, but 12 other carriers as well. The boarding pass that had started everything, now framed and mounted on the wall behind Jamal, had become an unofficial logo of the initiative, a reminder of contested space reclaimed. Isaiah Wilson opened the meeting with characteristic directness. "We're here to evaluate not just compliance but effectiveness. A policy that exists only on paper isn't worth the ink used to print it." Elena Vasquez, now Senior Vice President at Atlantic Sky, presented the first set of findings. In the 2 years since implementation, reported incidents of discriminatory treatment have decreased by 62%. More importantly, resolution satisfaction has increased by 84%. She clicked to the next slide. But numbers only tell part of the story. The cultural shift has been equally significant. The meeting continued with testimony from flight attendants, gate agents, and executives, each sharing perspectives on how standardized procedures had removed ambiguity and reduced opportunities for bias to influence decisions. Most compelling was the testimony of Vivian Bennett, who had become one of the program's most effective advocates. "I used to believe I was just doing my job," she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned insight. "I didn't see how my assumptions were shaping my actions. The protocol didn't just change procedures, it changed my perspective." "Tell us more about that transformation," Ms. Bennett Isaiah prompted. "Your journey is particularly instructive." Vivian nodded, hands clasped tightly before her. "At first I was angry, defensive. I thought I was being unfairly accused, made into a scapegoat. I kept insisting I would have questioned anyone in that situation regardless of race." She paused, gathering courage for honesty. But during the training, we reviewed data showing that first-class verification checks were performed on black passengers at 6 times the rate of white passengers. I couldn't argue with those numbers. They forced me to confront patterns I'd been blind to. Jamal watched her speak, noting the genuine transformation evident in her demeanor. What had begun as forced participation had evolved into authentic commitment not through punishment but through education and accountability. After the meeting, Jamal and his father stood by the windows overlooking Atlanta. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" Jamal asked. Isaiah shook his head. The most powerful changes often begin with a single moment of standing your ground. You refused to accept an individual solution to a collective problem. That made all the difference. Later that evening, Jamal attended a reception where he was approached by a young flight attendant he didn't recognize. "I know you probably get this all the time," she said, nervous energy evident in her shifting stance, "but I wanted to thank you personally. I was hired during Atlantic Sky's diversity initiative. Before the Wilson Protocol, someone like me with natural hair and from my neighborhood wouldn't have made it through the interview process." "I'm glad things are changing," Jamal replied. "It's more than change," she said. "It's transformation. And it started because you stayed in your seat." As Jamal drove back to his hotel, he reflected on how a moment of discrimination had launched an unlikely journey. The protocol had expanded beyond airlines to hotel chains, retail establishments, and even healthcare facilities, any space where split-second judgments about who belonged could lead to unequal treatment. What had begun as a humiliating experience for one teenager had catalyzed industry-wide accountability measures that protected thousands daily. The most meaningful victory wasn't the apology Jamal received or the policies that bore his name. It was in the stories of people who would never know discrimination in those spaces because the structures that enabled it had been redesigned. His phone buzzed with a message from his father. CNN just reported, "United Airlines is adopting the protocol." That's the last major carrier. Full industry adoption in under 3 years. Extraordinary. Jamal smiled, remembering his mother's words that his father often quoted. "True change isn't measured by how it affects you, but by how it transforms possibilities for others." The next morning, Jamal boarded another flight, this one taking him back to Stanford. As he settled into his seat, he noticed a small plaque mounted on the bulkhead wall. It read, "The Wilson Protocol, ensuring every passenger is treated with equal dignity and respect." Beside him, an elderly black woman noticed his attention on the plaque. "Do you know the story behind that?" she asked. "I'm familiar with it," Jamal replied with a small smile. "My grandson wrote a school paper about it," she said proudly, "about how one young man refused to move and changed everything. Reminds me of Rosa Parks. Sometimes standing your ground is the bravest thing you can do." Jamal nodded, humbled by the comparison. "I think the real heroes are the people who take a single moment and turn it into lasting change." "Well," the woman said, patting his hand with the gentle wisdom of years, "whoever that young man was, I hope he knows how many people sit more comfortably because he refused to stand." As the plane took off, Jamal watched the ground fall away below. The incident that had once filled him with anxiety and humiliation now felt like a distant catalyst, important not for the discomfort it caused, but for the transformation it ignited. The boarding pass that had been contested was now a symbol of something much larger, a reminder that dignity isn't just something you claim for yourself, but something you help secure for others. 3 years after that fateful flight, Jamal stood at a podium in San Francisco addressing the National Conference on Corporate Responsibility. Now a junior at Stanford and an intern at his father's company, he had become a reluctant but effective advocate for institutional change. "What began as a simple refusal to give up a seat I had rightfully purchased," he told the audience, "evolved into something much larger, a recognition that isolated incidents of discrimination are rarely isolated at all. They're symptoms of fundamental problems that require fundamental solutions. In the audience sat executives from dozens of major companies, many of whom had implemented versions of the Wilson Protocol in their own industries. What had begun in airlines had spread to hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and beyond any space where split-second judgments about who belonged could lead to discriminatory treatment. After his speech, a young woman approached him. "I'm Rebecca Alvarez," she introduced herself. "I lead customer experience at Meridian Hotels. We adopted the protocol last year, and I wanted to share something with you." She handed him a tablet showing before and after customer satisfaction scores. "These are from our Miami Beach location, historically our most problematic for complaints of discriminatory treatment. After implementing the protocol, complaints decreased by 78%, while overall satisfaction scores improved across all demographic groups." "That's significant," Jamal noted, studying the data. "But here's what's most interesting." Rebecca continued, swiping to the next slide. White customers' satisfaction improved too. Turns out, clear, consistent policies make everyone feel more valued. Fairness benefits everyone, not just those who were previously disadvantaged. This pattern had emerged across industries. The protocol improved experiences not just for those who had previously experienced discrimination, but for all customers. Fairness and clarity benefited everyone, creating a business case for equity that was changing corporate America's approach. Later that evening, Jamal received a call from Dr. Anthony Durham, the civil rights attorney who had helped craft the original proposal. "I just finished reviewing the annual compliance reports from the airlines," Durham said. "The numbers are impressive, but I'm more interested in what you're seeing on the ground. Is this creating real change or just better documented bias?" "It's real," Jamal assured him. "I've flown 26 times in the past year on 8 different airlines. The difference is palpable not just in policies but in culture. The crew interactions feel different. The power dynamics have shifted. That's what we hoped for," Durham replied. Cultural transformation, not just procedural compliance. The soul, not just the skeleton. The conversation shifted to Durham's newest project, applying protocol principles to healthcare settings where bias could have life or death consequences. The ripples continued to spread outward, touching systems far beyond air travel. The following week, Jamal attended a ceremony at Atlantic Sky's headquarters where the airline was launching a scholarship program for underrepresented students interested in aviation careers. The program had been Elena Vasquez's initiative, but she credited the Wilson Protocol as its inspiration. Changing policies was just the beginning, Elena told the assembled scholarship recipients. Creating pathways for new voices and perspectives is how we ensure the change endures. As Jamal watched the young scholarship winners, many from backgrounds rarely represented in aviation leadership, he felt a profound sense of purpose. His moment of standing firm had helped create opportunities that would outlast any policy or protocol. After the ceremony, he was approached by a familiar face, Vivian Bennett, now the director of the airline's Cultural Awareness Program. "I almost didn't come today," she admitted, the tension in her shoulders revealing her discomfort. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I'm glad you did," Jamal replied sincerely. "I want you to know," Vivian said, her voice steady but emotional, "that day changed my life too. Not just my job, my entire perspective. I've spent 3 years trying to understand why I did what I did and how I can help others recognize their own biases before they harm someone. That's the most important work," Jamal acknowledged, recognizing the courage it took to face one's own failings. As they talked, Jamal realized that true transformation wasn't about punishing those who had discriminated, but creating structures where bias was less likely to determine outcomes and cultures where growth and accountability could coexist. That night he called his father. The scholarship ceremony went well, Jamal reported. 20 students who might never have considered aviation careers now with full funding and mentorship. "Your mother would have loved that," Isaiah replied, his voice warm with pride and memory. She always said the measure of effective change wasn't how it punished wrongdoing, but how it expanded possibility. Jamal smiled, remembering his mother's wisdom. The protocol is opening doors I never imagined when I just wanted to keep my seat. That's how meaningful change works, Isaiah reflected. It starts with standing firm in one space, but eventually transforms many spaces. The ripples keep spreading long after the initial stone is cast. I met with Vivian today, Jamal said after a pause. How was that? Surprisingly good. She's really changed, not just performing change, but embodying it. That was your idea, Isaiah reminded him. Rehabilitation rather than punishment. You understood something many miss, that permanent change requires transformation, not just consequences. As Jamal prepared for sleep that night, he thought about the chain of events his contested seat had triggered. The boarding pass, that simple rectangle of paper, had become a catalyst for change far beyond its intended purpose. Like the butterfly effect, one moment of standing firm had created ripples that continued to expand, touching lives he would never know, but who would benefit from his refusal to accept injustice. 5 years to the day after Jamal Wilson refused to give up his first-class seat, he stood in Terminal A of Atlanta International Airport. The space had been renovated, modernized, but still held the echoes of that pivotal confrontation that changed the trajectory of his life and the policies of an entire industry. Now, a recent Stanford graduate and preparing for graduate studies at MIT, Jamal had returned to Atlanta for the unveiling of something unexpected, a small but significant installation in the terminal's main concourse. Atlantic Sky Airways, along with 12 other airlines, had commissioned a permanent exhibit titled Transformation Through Accountability, the Wilson Protocol and the Evolution of Equitable Service. The modest display chronicled the events that began with discrimination and culminated in industry-wide change. It featured interactive elements showing how standardized procedures had virtually eliminated disparate treatment in seating disputes, upgrade allocations, and customer service interactions. The centerpiece of the display was a framed boarding pass, a replica of the one that had started it all. The simple rectangle of paper, now elevated to symbol its meaning, transformed from permission to occupy space into catalyst for change. As Jamal studied the installation, a voice behind him said, "It's strange to see your own story told as history, isn't it?" He turned to find Richard Phillips, now retired as CEO of Atlantic Sky, but still influential in aviation circles. "Mr. Phillips," Jamal greeted him with a handshake. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "I wouldn't miss it," Phillips replied. Not many corporate leaders get to witness their greatest challenge become their most important legacy. The two men studied the installation together. Jamal noted that it didn't sanitize the original incident. It acknowledged the discrimination clearly while focusing primarily on the transformation that followed. "You know," Phillips said reflectively, "when your father first leveraged our partnership to demand change, I resented it. I saw it as coercion. It took me years to recognize it was actually leadership." Jamal nodded, appreciating the candor. "My father always says true partnerships improve both organizations, not just their bottom lines." He was right, Phillips acknowledged. The protocol didn't just change how we treated passengers. It transformed our entire corporate culture. Employee satisfaction is up. Turnover is down. We're attracting talent that would never have considered us before. Sometimes what looks like a crisis is actually an opportunity disguised as a problem. The conversation was interrupted as attendees gathered for the official unveiling ceremony. Isaiah Wilson arrived, his presence still commanding despite the passage of years. He was accompanied by Elena Vasquez, now Atlantic Sky's Executive Vice President of Operations, the highest-ranking Hispanic woman in the company's history. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Speakers from civil rights organizations, airline industry groups, and corporate leadership described how the Wilson Protocol had evolved from crisis response to industry standard. Most powerful were testimonials from crew members and passengers about experiences that would never have occurred under previous practices. Diana Rivera, now Atlantic Sky's Chief of Customer Experience, concluded the ceremony with a simple but profound statement. The Wilson Protocol wasn't just about preventing discrimination. It was about creating a culture where excellence and equity become inseparable, where doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing are one and the same. After the formal proceedings, Jamal found himself face to face with someone unexpected, Thomas Anderson, the elderly man who had demanded his seat 5 years earlier. Mr. Brooks Anderson said, using Jamal's travel name with obvious discomfort. "I've wanted to speak with you for some time." Jamal nodded, waiting. "What happened that day?" Anderson began, then paused to collect himself. "I've had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself, about assumptions I didn't even realize I was making." He extended his hand. "I wanted to apologize in person, not just for that day, but for a lifetime of entitlement I never examined." Jamal accepted the handshake, recognizing the genuine remorse behind it. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Anderson." As the event concluded, Jamal found himself alone at the installation reading the final panel titled The Wilson Legacy. It described how the protocol had expanded beyond airlines to transform customer service standards across multiple industries. His phone buzzed with a message from his father, who had stepped away to take a call. "Just heard from Horizons Council. The Wilson Protocol has been cited in new federal guidelines for equitable service standards. What began as one airline's response is becoming national policy." Jamal looked up from his phone to see a young black boy no more than 12 studying the installation with his mother. The boy pointed to Jamal's name on the display, then looked up and recognized him from the ceremony. "That's really you?" the boy asked, eyes wide with amazement. "It is," Jamal confirmed with a smile. "My mom says you wouldn't move when they told you to." The boy continued. "And that changed everything." "That's partly true," Jamal replied, glancing at the boy's mother, who nodded encouragement. "I stayed in a seat I had the right to occupy, but the change came from many people working together to fix the structures that allowed discrimination to happen in the first place." "So one person really can change things?" the boy asked. Jamal considered this. One person can start the change by standing firm. But lasting transformation takes many people committed to making things better for everyone, not just themselves. As Jamal left the airport that evening, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a moment of discrimination and evolved into a movement for accountability. The incident that once filled him with anxiety and humiliation had been transformed into something powerful and enduring. His phone rang, Isaiah calling to coordinate dinner plans. As they spoke, Jamal watched planes taking off and landing, each carrying hundreds of passengers who would never know his name but whose experiences were more equitable because he had refused to accept injustice. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Jamal said to his father. "Mom always told me that dignity isn't just something you claim for yourself. It's something you help secure for others. She would be so proud of how you've lived that truth." Isaiah replied, his voice warm with emotion. As Jamal headed toward the restaurant where they would celebrate this milestone, he carried with him not just the satisfaction of personal vindication, but the deeper fulfillment of having transformed an individual injustice into institutional change, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is not just to overcome it, but to dismantle the structures that enable it. What began as a moment of discrimination in an airplane cabin transformed into a blueprint for institutional accountability that continues to expand its reach. Jamal Wilson's refusal to give up his rightfully purchased seat, amplified by his father's strategic leverage, created ripples that changed not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to equitable treatment. The Wilson Protocol demonstrates that meaningful change requires more than addressing individual incidents. It demands examining and reforming the structures that enable those incidents to occur. By replacing subjective judgments with clear, consistent standards, the protocol reduced opportunities for bias to determine outcomes, creating more equitable experiences for everyone involved. Perhaps most powerfully, this story reminds us that privilege carries responsibility, that those with access to influence have an obligation to use it not just for personal benefit, but to create pathways for those without such advantages. True transformation happens when we recognize that dignity isn't just something we claim for ourselves, but something we help secure for everyone. If you found this story inspiring, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that standing firm in the face of injustice can create ripples of change far beyond what we imagine. Remember, sometimes the most significant changes begin with a single moment of refusing to give up your seat at the table.